Some things are seen only by those who are not meant to see them. Breckenridge, Colorado sits at an elevation of 9,600 feet in the heart of Summit County, cradled by the 10-mile range and the Continental Divide. It is a town built on extraction, first gold, then silver, then something less tangible, the wealth of tourists seeking pristine slopes and postcard winters. By the 1980s, the mining shacks had given way to ski lodges, and Main Street had been preserved in careful Victorian costume, its false front buildings painted in cheerful period colors, its lampposts wrapped in garlands each December. The town's history is not without shadow. In 1882, a fire swept through the business district, killing 11 and leaving dozens homeless in the mountain winter. In 1910, an avalanche buried a group of miners in their bunkhouse near the Wellington mine. 3 bodies were never recovered, and throughout the early 20th century, there were scattered reports of what locals called the quiet processions. Figures seen walking the frozen streets after midnight, always in old-fashioned dress, always moving in ways that seemed somehow wrong. These stories were told in bars and around fireplaces, dismissed as tall tales or the effects of altitude and alcohol. By 1987, few residents remembered them at all. December of that year was unusually cold, even for Breckenridge. Temperatures dropped to 23 below zero on the night of the 21st, and a fresh snowfall had blanketed Main Street in silence. The ski season was in full swing, and the town was crowded with visitors from Denver and beyond, drawn by the promise of a white Christmas in the mountains. It was in this atmosphere, festive, frozen, and full of strangers, that 3 people saw something they would never be able to explain. The first witness was Margaret Holloway, a 64-year-old widow who had lived in Breckenridge since 1959. She worked the late shift at the Prospector restaurant, and on the night of December 21st, she left through the back door at approximately 2:10 in the morning. She walked around to Main Street to check that the front awning had been cleared of snow. What she saw made her stop. A group of figures, she would later estimate between 8 and 12, stood in the middle of the street, arranged in 2 neat rows. They wore dark Victorian clothing, long coats, high collars, women in bonnets, men in top hats. Their mouths were open as if singing, but Margaret heard nothing, not a note, not a breath. Then they began to move. They walked backward, all of them, in perfect unison. Their legs moved in smooth, synchronized steps, their bodies gliding down the street toward the south end of town. Their mouths continued to move, but the silence held. Margaret stood frozen for what she estimated was 15 seconds. Then she ran back inside the restaurant and called the police. The second witness was David Okonkwo, a 29-year-old electrician from Denver who was staying at the Village Hotel with his wife and young daughter. He had stepped outside at approximately 2:12 a.m. to smoke a cigarette on the hotel's front porch. He saw the same group, same clothing, same formation, same impossible backward movement, passing directly in front of him, no more than 30 feet away. He did not call the police. He went back inside, woke his wife, and told her they were leaving in the morning. They checked out at 6 a.m. and drove back to Denver without stopping. The third witness was Thomas Lindqvist, a 41-year-old ski instructor originally from Minnesota who was walking home from a friend's house on Adams Street. He encountered the group as they, or it, passed the intersection with Main Street. He described the same details: the Victorian dress, the synchronized backward walking, the moving mouths, the absolute silence. But Thomas added something the others did not mention. He said that as the group passed, one of the figures, a woman in a dark bonnet, turned her head and looked directly at him. Her mouth was still moving. Her body was still walking backward. But her eyes, he said, were fixed on his. He could not describe her expression. He said only that it was patient. Margaret Holloway's call to the Breckenridge Police Department was logged at 2:17 a.m. on December 22, 1987. Officer Gerald Swanson responded and met her at the Prospector restaurant at 2:31. He took her statement and then walked the length of Main Street with a flashlight. He found nothing, no footprints, no disturbances in the snow. The street was pristine. In his report, filed later that morning, Swanson noted that Mrs. Holloway appeared lucid and visibly distressed, and that he had no reason to doubt her sincerity. He also noted that the temperature at the time of the sighting was 21 degrees below zero and that no organized caroling events were scheduled in Breckenridge that week. Thomas Lindqvist's account did not surface until 3 days later, when he mentioned the incident to a coworker at the ski resort. The coworker, Janice Weaver, had heard a rumor about something strange on Main Street and encouraged Thomas to contact the police. He did so on December 26th. David Okonkwo never filed a report. His account was only discovered in 2004, when a researcher named Franklin Mora, working on a book about Colorado folklore, tracked him down through hotel records. By then, Okonkwo was 56 years old and living in Atlanta. He agreed to speak on the condition that his name not be published during his lifetime. He passed away in 2019, and his testimony was released the following year. "I know what I saw," he told Mora. "I've spent 30 years trying to convince myself I didn't, but I did. They were walking, backward, all of them, in the middle of the night, in the snow, and there was no sound, none, like the world had been muted." When asked why he never reported the incident, Okonkwo paused for a long time. "Because I knew no one would believe me," he finally said, "and because I didn't want to know what they were." In January of 1988, a local journalist named Patricia Espinoza wrote a brief article for the Summit County Journal about the sightings. The article quoted Margaret Holloway and Thomas Lindqvist and noted the absence of any official explanation. It ran on page 7 and generated little response. But Patricia continued to investigate quietly. She obtained the police report from Officer Swanson and requested any available surveillance footage from businesses on Main Street. Only one establishment had a functioning camera that night: Columbine Jewelers, located at 123 South Main Street. The footage was grainy and black and white, shot from a camera mounted above the store's front door. It showed a clear view of the street, the snow falling gently, the lampposts glowing in the darkness. At 2:14 a.m., according to the timestamp, the footage showed nothing. The street was empty. The snow was undisturbed. There were no figures, no movement, no sign of anything unusual. Patricia reviewed the footage multiple times. She consulted with a video technician in Denver, who confirmed that the tape had not been altered or edited. The timestamp was accurate. The camera was functioning normally. And yet Margaret Holloway, standing just 200 feet away at that exact moment, had seen a group of carolers walking backward down the middle of the street. Patricia never published a follow-up article. Her notes, discovered after her death in 2012, contained a single handwritten observation that has never been explained. Checked town records. No caroling groups registered December 1987, but found something else. Breckenridge Historical Society archives list a Christmas Eve processional held annually from 1874 to 1881, ended after the fire. Participants walked the length of Main Street singing hymns, walked south to north, the opposite direction from what the witnesses described. She had underlined the last sentence twice. The sightings of December 1987 were never officially investigated. The police report was filed and forgotten. The surveillance footage was eventually recorded over. Patricia Espinoza's notes sat in a box in her daughter's garage for 8 years before Franklin Mora found them. Margaret Holloway passed away in 1994. Thomas Lindqvist moved to Oregon in 2001 and declined all requests for interviews. David Okonkwo took his testimony to the grave. No one else has reported seeing the carolers since 1987. But every December, when the snow falls on Main Street and the lampposts glow in the darkness, some residents of Breckenridge still glance over their shoulders. They still listen for singing that never comes. And they still wonder why the only footage of that night showed nothing at all, while three separate people standing in three separate places saw exactly the same thing. A group of figures in Victorian dress, walking backward, mouths moving in silent song, heading south toward the edge of town, toward the mountains, toward whatever waited for them in the frozen dark. Patient, synchronized, and utterly without sound. Some gifts are not meant to be opened. Telluride sits at the end of a box canyon in the San Miguel Mountains of southwestern Colorado, accessible by only one road that winds 8 miles through the valley before dead-ending at the town itself. At an elevation of 8,750 feet, it is one of the highest incorporated towns in North America. The mountains that surround it rise to over 14,000 feet, forming walls of granite and snow that have isolated the community since its founding as a mining camp in 1878. The town's name is often said to derive from tellurium, a mineral found in the gold ore that drew prospectors to the region. But older residents tell a different story. They say the name comes from the phrase, "to hell you ride," a warning given to those who enter the canyon, a suggestion that some journeys have no return. The Sheraton Hotel has stood on West Colorado Avenue since 1895. It is one of the oldest continuously operating hotels in Colorado, a 3-story Victorian building with a white facade and green trim that has survived fires, floods, and the boom and bust cycles of mountain economics. William Jennings Bryan once gave a speech from its balcony. Butch Cassidy reportedly robbed his first bank just down the street. By 2001, the Sheraton had been renovated into a boutique hotel, popular with skiers and summer hikers seeking historic charm. Its 12 guest rooms were named rather than numbered, each decorated in period style. Room 12, officially called the Telluride Suite, occupied the southwest corner of the 3rd floor, overlooking the main street and the mountains beyond. It was outside the door of this room that the first gift appeared. On the morning of December 25, 2001, housekeeper Rosa Delgado arrived at the Sheraton at 6:15 a.m. to begin her shift. As she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, she noticed a small package sitting on the carpet outside room 12. It was wrapped in silver paper with a white ribbon, approximately the size of a shoebox. A tag attached to the ribbon read, in neat handwritten script, "For Margaret, room 12, with patience." Rosa assumed the gift had been left by a guest and brought it to the front desk. The night manager, Elliot Saunders, checked the registry. Room 12 had been occupied the previous night by a couple from Texas named Bergman. There was no Margaret registered anywhere in the hotel. There had been no Margaret registered in December at all. Saunders placed the gift in the hotel's lost and found, assuming someone would claim it. No one did. The following Christmas Eve, December 24, 2002, an identical package appeared in the same location, same silver paper, same white ribbon, same handwritten tag. For Margaret, room 12, with patience. This time, the night clerk was a young woman named Deirdre Kowalski. She had not worked the previous Christmas and knew nothing of the first gift. She brought the package to the manager on duty, a man named Victor Sandoval, who remembered the incident from the year before. He placed the new gift alongside the old one in a storage closet and made a note in the hotel's incident log. By 2005, there were 4 identical packages in that closet. By 2009, there were 9. It became this thing we didn't talk about, recalled Sandoval in a 2018 interview with a regional podcast called Mountain Mysteries. Every Christmas Eve, same time, sometime between midnight and 6 a.m., the package would appear. Same wrapping, same tag, same words. We checked the security cameras after the third year. Nothing. The hallway would be empty, and then the package would just be there. No one walking up, no one walking away. Just there. Sandoval confirmed that the hotel's security system in that era recorded at a low frame rate, approximately 1 image every 4 seconds. He acknowledged that someone could theoretically have placed the package and retreated without being captured. But he also noted that the cameras covered both stairwells and the elevator. No unexplained figures were ever recorded on any Christmas Eve during the 9-year period. "We started calling it the Margaret Package," said Deirdre Kowalski, who continued working at the Sheraton until 2014. Some of the staff thought it was a prank, others thought it was sad, like someone was trying to reach a person who wasn't there anymore. But the handwriting never changed. 9 years, same handwriting. We had a graphologist look at the tags once, informally. She said it was consistent with a woman in her 60s or 70s. Steady hand, old-fashioned penmanship, the kind they taught in schools before the war. The decision to open the packages came in January of 2010, after new ownership assumed control of the hotel. The new general manager, Priscilla Hartman, was informed of the tradition and decided it was time to resolve the mystery. She gathered the 9 packages, still sealed, still in their original wrapping, and opened them one by one in the presence of 2 witnesses, the head of housekeeping and a local attorney named Douglas Frey, who documented the process. 8 of the boxes were empty. The 9th, the final package from Christmas 2009, contained a single sheet of paper, folded twice. On it, written in the same handwriting as the tags, were a series of numbers: 37 degrees, 56 minutes, 22 seconds north; 107 degrees, 49 minutes, 31 seconds west. These were geographic coordinates. Frey entered the coordinates into a mapping program and found that they pointed to a location approximately 11 miles northeast of Telluride, high in the Wilson Range, within the boundaries of the Lizard Head Wilderness. The area was inaccessible by road and covered in snow for most of the year. Hartman debated what to do. The coordinates were not accompanied by any message, any explanation, any context. There was no indication that anyone was in danger or that any crime had been committed. She consulted with the San Miguel County Sheriff's Office, who advised that without evidence of a criminal matter, they could not justify a search and rescue operation in hazardous winter terrain. She waited until summer. On July 14, 2010, Priscilla Hartman hired a backcountry guide named Samuel Ojeda to lead a small party to the coordinates. The group included Hartman, Ojeda, Douglas Frey, and a freelance photographer named Beatrice Engel. They hiked for 7 hours through dense forest and steep scree fields before reaching the location indicated by the note. What they found was a clearing. It was roughly circular, approximately 40 feet in diameter, surrounded by spruce and fir trees. The ground within the clearing was covered in dead grass, brown and brittle, despite the lush green of the surrounding meadow. No wildflowers grew there, no moss, no lichen on the rocks that dotted its perimeter. In the exact center of the clearing, they found a small depression in the earth, as if something had once been buried and then removed. The soil was loose, darker than the surrounding dirt. They searched for 3 hours. They found nothing else. No bones, no artifacts, no structures, no indication of what the clearing had been used for or why the coordinates had led them there. Ojeda, who had guided in the San Juans for over 20 years, later said he had never seen a clearing like it. The dead zone, that's what I called it in my head. Everything around it was alive, but inside that circle nothing grew, nothing moved. I didn't hear a single bird the whole time we were there. It wasn't natural. I don't mean supernatural. I mean, it didn't follow the rules, I know. Hartman filed a report with the Forest Service requesting an environmental assessment of the site. The report was acknowledged but never acted upon. She followed up 3 times over the following year. Each inquiry was met with the same response. The matter was under review. No review was ever completed. No explanation was ever given. The packages stopped appearing after 2009. Room 12 continues to operate as the Telluride Suite. Guests occasionally ask about the room's history, and staff occasionally tell abbreviated versions of the story, a strange tradition, a mysterious gift giver, a note that led nowhere. But some details are left out. Rosa Delgado, who found the first package, quit her job in 2007 without explanation. She moved to Arizona and has declined all interview requests. Elliot Saunders, the night manager who first logged the incident, died in 2011 of a heart attack. He was 53 years old, and the clearing in the Wilson Range remains exactly as Hartman found it in 2010. Satellite imagery from 2012, 2016, and 2023 confirms that the circle of dead grass has neither expanded nor receded. It has not healed. It has not changed. Some hikers have reported visiting the coordinates expecting to find nothing. They find exactly what Hartman found, a perfect circle of dead ground in the middle of a living forest. And they find, almost universally, that they do not want to stay. There are no further clues. There is no Margaret. There is only a clearing that will not grow, a note that pointed to nothing, and 9 identical packages wrapped in silver paper, delivered by no one, for someone who was never there. The gift, it seems, was patience, and whatever was waiting has not yet finished waiting. Some things belong only to the places where they are found. Elkhorn Ghost Town lies at approximately 9,200 feet in the mountains west of Boulder County, Colorado, accessible only by a 4-mile trail that climbs through dense lodgepole pine before opening onto a windswept alpine meadow. The settlement was established in 1879 after a prospector named Cornelius Whitfield discovered a vein of silver ore in the granite cliffs above. Within 2 years, the population had swelled to nearly 400 souls, miners, merchants, families seeking fortune in the thin mountain air. The boom did not last. By 1888, the silver had begun to run out. By 1891, the population had dwindled to fewer than 50. The final residents departed in December of 1893, driven out by a winter so severe that supply wagons could not reach the settlement for 9 consecutive weeks. The town was abandoned with remarkable haste. Photographs from an 1895 geological survey show buildings still furnished, chairs at tables, tools hanging on walls, as if the inhabitants had simply walked away mid-task and never returned. Today, 7 structures remain standing in various states of collapse. The assay office, the general store, 3 residential cabins, the remnants of a blacksmith shop, and the shell of what was once a small church. The church lost its roof in 1932 when heavy snow caused the timber beams to give way. Its 4 walls still stand, open to the sky, the altar long since rotted to nothing. It is in these structures, particularly the church, that the ornaments have been found. The first documented report came from a hiking group in December of 1997. 4 members of the Boulder Mountaineering Club had made the winter trek to Elkhorn as part of an annual tradition. The group leader, a retired geology professor named Arthur Pendergast, later filed a detailed account with the Boulder County Historical Society. According to Pendergast, the group arrived at Elkhorn shortly after noon on December 21st. The temperature was approximately 12 degrees Fahrenheit, with light snow falling. As they explored the ruins, one member of the party, a woman named Constance Oyalaran, noticed something glinting in the rafters of the old church. Hanging from a partially collapsed beam, approximately 8 feet above the stone floor, was a glass ornament. It was spherical, roughly 3 inches in diameter, deep red in color with delicate white striations that spiraled from top to bottom. A thin silver wire attached it to the wood. It looked antique, Pendergast wrote, hand-blown with small imperfections and air bubbles consistent with 19th century glasswork. But it also looked new. There was no dust, no weathering, no indication it had hung there for more than a few days at most. Constance Yularen reached up and touched the Yestad ornament. She immediately pulled her hand back. It was warm, she told Pendergast. Not room temperature, warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, except there was no sunlight. It was overcast and snowing. The group photographed the ornament but did not remove it. They continued their exploration and found 2 additional ornaments, one green, one gold, hanging in the collapsed doorway of one of the residential cabins. Both were warm to the touch. Both appeared freshly placed. When the group returned to Boulder and developed their photographs, the images of the ornaments came out blurred, not the surrounding structures, just the ornaments themselves. Pendergast noted this anomaly in his report, but offered no explanation. Over the following years, similar accounts accumulated. A pair of cross-country skiers in December 2002, a wildlife photographer in January 2005, a group of graduate students conducting an architectural survey in December 2009. Each reported finding ornaments in the Elkhorn ruins during the winter months. Each described the same characteristics: hand-blown glass, antique appearance, warmth despite freezing temperatures. The colors varied: red, green, gold, silver, deep blue, but the style remained consistent. Local antique dealers who examined photographs of the ornaments identified them as likely dating from the 1870s or 1880s, consistent with the period when Elkhorn was inhabited. But no records exist of a glassblower ever working in the settlement, and the nearest known glass manufacturing operation was in Denver, over 60 miles away by mountain trail. The craftsmanship is exceptional, noted Elena Johansson, a glass historian at the Colorado School of Mines, in a 2012 correspondence. These are not mass-produced ornaments. Each one would have required significant skill and specialized equipment. The idea that someone is hand-blowing ornaments and secretly hanging them in an abandoned ghost town every winter is frankly absurd. But the alternative explanations are even more difficult to accept. The first attempt to remove an ornament for laboratory analysis occurred in December of 2011. Dr. Raymond Alcazar, a material scientist from the University of Colorado, organized a small expedition specifically to retrieve a sample. His team successfully located 3 ornaments in the church ruins and carefully removed one, a pale blue sphere with silver threading, using gloved hands and sterile collection protocols. Alcazar placed the ornament in a sealed polycarbonate container cushioned with foam padding. The container was then placed in his backpack for the 4-mile hike back to the trailhead. When Alcazar reached his vehicle and opened the container, it was empty. The foam padding showed a circular depression where the ornament had rested. There was no hole in the container, no breach in the seal. The ornament was simply gone. "I have no explanation," Alcazar wrote in his research notes, which were later obtained through a Freedom of Information request by a journalist named Marcus Oduya. "The container was in my possession the entire descent. I never opened it, never set down my pack. The ornament was there when we left Elkhorn. It was not there when I reached the car. I am a scientist. I do not believe in the impossible, but I also cannot explain what happened." A second attempt was made in December 2014 by a documentary film crew working on a series about Colorado ghost towns. They successfully filmed the removal of an ornament, a deep green sphere, and documented its placement in a locked metal case. The case was transported by vehicle to a laboratory in Denver, When opened in front of cameras, the case contained only a small amount of fine glass powder, as if the ornament had simply disintegrated during transit. Analysis of the powder proved inconclusive. The silica composition was consistent with 19th century glass, but the sample was too small and too degraded for definitive dating. The third and final documented removal attempt occurred in December 2018. A private collector named Winston Garrett, who had become obsessed with the Elkhorn ornaments after reading about them online, hiked to the site alone and retrieved what he described as the most beautiful one yet, a gold ornament with intricate geometric patterns etched into its surface. Garrett photographed it, filmed it, and documented every step of his descent. He never reached the trailhead. Search and rescue teams found Garrett's vehicle at the parking area 3 days later after his family reported him missing. His body was discovered approximately 1 mile from Elkhorn, seated against a tree beside the trail. There were no signs of injury, no indication of a fall or animal attack. The county coroner ruled the cause of death as hypothermia, noting that Garrett's core temperature had dropped to a level inconsistent with survival. His backpack was found beside him, fully packed, with food and water and emergency supplies. The ornament was not among his possessions. It was not found anywhere along the trail. No photographs or video remained on his camera's memory card, only blank files with corrupted timestamps. The Elkhorn ornaments continue to appear each winter. Rangers with the U.S. Forest Service have confirmed sightings as recently as December 2023, though the agency has declined to investigate or comment officially. The ruins remain accessible to hikers, and no warnings have been posted. Those who have seen the ornaments describe them the same way: beautiful, inexplicable, and somehow wrong. Not wrong in their appearance, but wrong in their presence, objects that should not exist, in a place that should be empty, warm, when everything around them is frozen. No one has attempted to remove an ornament since Winston Garrett's death, but every December they appear again, hanging in the rafters of buildings that have stood empty for over 130 years, glinting in the gray winter light, waiting for hands that know better now than to reach for them. The people of Elkhorn left in 1893. They took their furniture, their tools, their winter coats. They left in haste, in hunger, in desperation, but someone, it seems, still decorates for Christmas. Some congregations never stop gathering. St. Elmo sits at 10,000 feet in the Sawatch Range of central Colorado, 18 miles southwest of Buena Vista, along a dirt road that becomes impassable each winter when the snows come. It is one of the best preserved ghost towns in the American West, a single street of weathered wooden buildings flanked by mountains that rise another 4,000 feet on either side. The town was founded in 1880 as Forest City, a supply hub for the gold and silver mines that honeycombed the surrounding peaks. It was renamed St. Elmo in 1881, reportedly after a popular novel of the era, though some historians dispute this origin. At its peak, St. Elmo had a population of nearly 2,000. It boasted a telegraph office, a post office, a general store, 3 hotels, and a small church, built in 1883 by a consortium of Methodist and Presbyterian families. The church was a modest structure, white clapboard, walls, a single room with wooden pews, a small bell tower that never received its bell due to a shipping error that was never corrected. The mines began to fail in the early 1900s. The railroad that had connected St. Elmo to the outside world ceased operations in 1922. By 1930, only 2 residents remained, Annabelle and Anthony Stark, siblings who had been born in the town and refused to leave. They maintained the buildings as best they could, charging small fees to curious visitors until Annabelle's death in 1960 and Anthony's death in 1961. The church lost its roof in the winter of 1958 when a heavy snowfall collapsed the aging timbers. The walls remained standing, as do the stone foundation and the frame of what was once the front door. The pews were removed decades ago, sold to antique dealers, or simply rotted away. The floor is now bare earth, covered in pine needles and the occasional animal track. It is here, in this roofless structure open to the sky, that the recordings have been made. The first documented audio anomaly was captured on December 24, 1994, by a wildlife researcher named Deborah Yamamoto. She had placed a passive audio recorder near the church as part of a study on nocturnal animal activity in high-altitude environments. The recorder was voice-activated, designed to capture any sounds above a certain decibel threshold. When Yamamoto reviewed the recordings the following week, she found 7 minutes of audio captured between 11:48 p.m. and 11:55 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The initial playback revealed what sounded like wind and distant static. But when she slowed the recording to half speed and applied noise reduction filters, something else emerged. Voices, dozens of them, singing in unison. The melody was recognizable as a hymn, though Yamamoto, who was not religious, could not identify which one. The words were unintelligible at normal speed, but when slowed further, they resolved into syllables that did not match any language she knew. She shared the recording with a colleague in the linguistics department at Colorado State University. That colleague, Dr. Emeka Nwosu, spent 3 months analyzing the audio. His conclusion, delivered in a cautious academic paper that was never formally published, was that the singers appeared to be using a dialect of Welsh, specifically a form of Middle Welsh that had not been spoken since approximately 1750. The phonological markers are consistent with pre-modern Welsh as preserved in historical documents and religious texts, Nwosu wrote. However, several elements do not match any known dialect. It is possible that this represents an isolated linguistic community that preserved archaic forms, or it is possible that the recording is a hoax. I cannot determine which explanation is more likely. The recording made its way into paranormal. Research circles in the early 2000s, dismissed by most academics but embraced by enthusiasts who began visiting St. Elmo each Christmas Eve in hopes of capturing similar phenomena. Most recorded nothing. But a small percentage, approximately 1 in 7, according to an informal survey conducted by a podcast called Thin Air Mysteries in 2019, captured audio anomalies that matched Yamamoto's original recording in tone, duration, and apparent content. The visual documentation began in 2008, when a photographer named Christopher Lindgren installed a motion-activated trail camera inside the church ruins as part of a personal project documenting Colorado ghost towns. He left the camera in place from December 20th through December 26th, checking it remotely via satellite uplink. On December 25th at 12:17 a.m., the camera activated. Lindgren reviewed the footage from his home in Fort Collins and saw something he could not explain. The interior of the church, visible in the camera's infrared mode, showed 8 distinct points of light arranged in 2 rows of 4. The lights were small, flickering, approximately the size and intensity of candle flames. They appeared to be moving slowly down the center of the nave toward where the altar would once have stood. The footage lasted 43 seconds. Then the lights simply vanished, not extinguished, but gone, as if someone had pressed a switch. I drove up there the next morning, Lindgren said in a 2012 interview. The snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. The camera was exactly where I left it. There was no sign anyone had been inside the church, but I checked the camera's internal temperature log. At 12:17 a.m., the ambient temperature inside the church spiked from 14 degrees below zero to 51 degrees above zero for exactly 43 seconds. Then it dropped back down. Lindgren's Footage was analyzed by a video forensics expert named Maureen Gallagher, who found no evidence of tampering or digital manipulation. The light sources, she noted, did not behave like flashlights, headlamps, or any conventional illumination technology. Their movement was too smooth, too synchronized, and their intensity remained constant despite their apparent motion. If this is a hoax, it's an extraordinarily sophisticated one, Gallagher concluded, but I can't tell you what it actually is. The historical record offers one possible connection, though it raises more questions than it answers. In 1883, the year the St. Elmo Church was built, the town's population included a significant contingent of Welsh immigrants who had come to work the mines. Many were from the coal mining regions of South Wales and brought with them traditions of choral singing that dated back centuries. The church's first minister, a man named Reverend Dafydd Prosser, conducted services in both English and Welsh, a practice that continued until his death in 1891. But the Welsh spoken in St. Elmo in the 1880s would have been modern Welsh, not the archaic dialect identified by Dr. Nwosu in the recordings. Unless the recordings are not capturing the voices of the miners who built the church, unless they are capturing something older. In 2016, a genealogist named Harriet Volkoff, researching the Welsh immigrant community of St. Elmo, discovered a brief mention in a letter written by Reverend Prosser in 1884. The letter, addressed to a colleague in Denver, described a matter of some concern regarding certain members of his congregation. "They sing the old songs," Prosser wrote, "the ones from before. They say their grandmothers taught them, and their grandmothers' grandmothers before that. I do not recognize the words. I do not think they are meant to be recognized. I have asked them to stop, but they continue to gather after the service has ended. They continue to sing. I confess I have begun to lock the church at night. I confess I am not certain it helps." No further letters from Prosser have been found. He died in 1891 of what the town records describe as exhaustion. He was 43 years old. The church at St. Elmo remains open to visitors during the summer months. The walls still stand, the floor is still bare earth. The sky is visible through the space where the roof once was, and in winter, snow accumulates in drifts along the stone foundation. Each Christmas Eve, a small number of researchers and enthusiasts make the difficult journey to the site, setting up equipment in the cold, waiting for midnight. Some record nothing. Some record wind and silence and the distant cry of coyotes, and some record voices, dozens of them, singing hymns in a language that should not exist anymore, gathering in a church that has not held a service in over 100 years. The congregation, it seems, has never disbanded. They simply changed when they meet. Some menus are not meant to be read. The Stanley Hotel stands at the eastern edge of Estes Park, Colorado, at an elevation of 7,500 feet, overlooking the town and the mountains beyond. It was built in 1909 by Freeland Oscar Stanley, inventor of the Stanley Steamer automobile, who came to Colorado seeking relief from tuberculosis and found instead a fortune in tourism. The hotel's Georgian architecture, white walls, red roof, sprawling verandas, was designed to evoke the grand resorts of New England, transplanted to the Rocky Mountain wilderness. The Stanley has always attracted visitors seeking something beyond ordinary accommodation. Its reputation for unusual occurrences began almost immediately after opening, with guests reporting unexplained sounds, flickering lights, and the sensation of being watched in empty corridors. In 1977, author Stephen King stayed in room 217 during a nearly empty off-season visit. Experience inspired him to write The Shining, cementing the hotel's association with the uncanny in popular imagination. But the hotel's management has always maintained a careful distance from sensationalism. The Stanley is a working hotel, a historic landmark, a venue for weddings and conferences. Its restaurant, Cascades, has operated continuously since the hotel's founding, serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner to guests and locals alike. The kitchen has been renovated multiple times over the decades. The menus have changed with the seasons and the tastes of successive generations. The children's menu, according to all official records, has always been straightforward. Chicken fingers, grilled cheese, macaroni and cheese, a small hamburger. Simple fare for young guests. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. And yet, between 1994 and 2003, 7 families filed formal complaints about a different menu entirely. The first complaint was lodged on December 28, 1994, by Gerald and Monica Stanhope of Lincoln, Nebraska. The Stanhopes had stayed at the Stanley from December 23rd through the 27th with their 2 children, a son, Marcus, age 9, and a daughter, Lily, age 6. According to the complaint, which is preserved in the hotel's archived correspondence, the family had dined at Cascades on Christmas Eve. Our server brought menus for the adults and separate menus for the children, Monica Stanhope wrote. The children's menus were different from what we expected. They were printed on thick, cream-colored paper, almost like parchment, and the dishes had unusual names. My husband and I did not pay close attention at the time. We were engaged in conversation. But our daughter became very quiet after looking at her menu, and when we asked what she wanted to order, she said she wasn't hungry anymore. The Stanhopes noted that Lily did not eat for the remainder of the trip. Upon returning home to Nebraska, she continued to refuse food for 12 days, consuming only water and small amounts of milk. On the 13th day, she resumed eating normally, with no memory of her behavior during the previous period. Medical examinations found nothing wrong with her. When we contacted the hotel to complain, Monica Stanhope concluded, they told us there was no such menu. They said the children's menu had chicken fingers and macaroni, but that is not what our daughter received. I am certain of this. The second complaint came in December 1996. The third in December 1998. By 2003, 7 families had reported nearly identical experiences. All had stayed at the Stanley during Christmas week. All had dined at Cascades with children between the ages of 5 and 11. All described receiving a children's menu printed on unusual paper with dish names that none of them could fully recall, though fragments surfaced in their accounts. Little Lamb's Last Supper appeared in 3 separate complaints. The Quiet Plate in 2. One father, a software engineer from Portland named Ansel Johansson, remembered a dish called What Grandmother Left Behind. Another mother, Teresa Birdsong of Albuquerque, recalled seeing the words milk and silence before her son closed the menu and pushed it away. None of the children could remember what they had seen. None could explain their subsequent refusal to eat. And all of them, every single one, stopped eating for exactly 12 days before resuming normal behavior. We take these concerns very seriously, said Constance Riley, who served as the Stanley's general manager from 1992 to 2005, in a 2004 interview with a Denver newspaper. But I want to be absolutely clear. No such menu has ever existed at this hotel. We have searched our archives, our print records, our vendor invoices. We have interviewed every member of our restaurant staff going back to 1990. There is no children's menu matching the descriptions in these complaints. We cannot explain what these families experienced, but we can say with certainty that it did not originate from our kitchen. The newspaper article generated modest regional interest and was quickly forgotten. But the complaints themselves remained in the hotel's files, and in 2011, a researcher named Owen Matsuda obtained copies through a public records request as part of a book project on Colorado's haunted hotels. Matsuda spent 2 years investigating the children's menu phenomenon. He interviewed 4 of the 7 families. He examined the hotel's printing contracts and found that all children's menus between 1990 and 2005 had been produced by the same Denver-based company, which confirmed that no cream-colored parchment paper had ever been ordered or delivered. He also discovered something the hotel's management had not mentioned publicly. In 1912, 3 years after the Stanley opened, a child died in the hotel. Her name was Annalise Whitmore, and she was 7 years old, the daughter of a wealthy Boston family vacationing in Estes Park. According to the death certificate, she succumbed to acute gastric distress on December 26, 2 days after Christmas. The attending physician noted that she had refused food for approximately 2 weeks prior to her death. The Whitmore family departed immediately after the funeral and never returned to Colorado. No lawsuit was filed, no public statement was made. The incident was recorded in the hotel's private logbooks, which Matsuda accessed through a sympathetic former employee, but was never mentioned in any official history of the Stanley. "I am not suggesting a direct connection," Matsuda wrote in his unpublished manuscript. "I am simply noting that in 1912, a child at the Stanley Hotel stopped eating for 2 weeks during Christmas and died. And between 1994 and 2003, 7 children at the same hotel stopped eating for 12 days during Christmas after seeing a menu that officially does not exist. I do not know what this means. I am not certain anyone does." Matsuda also discovered that in January 1995, 1 month after the first complaint, a longtime member of the Cascades waitstaff resigned without notice. Her name was Delphine Marchetti, and she had worked at the hotel for 18 years. She left no forwarding address and has never been located. Her personnel file contained a single disciplinary note, dated December 1994, citing unauthorized distribution of materials to guests. No further details were provided. No one currently employed at the hotel recalls what the note referred to. The children's menu complaint stopped after 2003. No similar incidents have been reported in the 20 years since. The families involved have largely declined to discuss their experiences, and several have requested that their names be removed from any public accounts. Marcus Stanhope, the 9-year-old boy who dined at Cascades in 1994, is now in his late 30s. In 2019, he responded to an inquiry from a podcast researching the Stanley Hotel's history. His response was brief. "I don't remember the menu," he wrote. "I don't remember what my sister saw, but I remember that she wouldn't eat. I remember my parents crying. And I remember that on the 12th night I woke up and she was standing at the foot of my bed, and she said, 'I'm hungry now.' Just like that. Like nothing had happened." He did not respond to follow-up questions. The Stanley Hotel continues to operate year-round, hosting thousands of guests each Christmas season. Cascades Restaurant serves the same children's menu it has served for decades: chicken fingers, grilled cheese, macaroni and cheese, a small hamburger. The menus are printed on standard white paper with the hotel's logo at the top. No one has reported seeing a cream-colored menu since 2003. But in the hotel's archives, filed alongside the 7 complaints, there is a single photograph that Matsuda was never able to explain. It was taken by Gerald Stanhope on Christmas Eve 1994, a snapshot of his daughter Lily sitting at the table before dinner arrived. In her hands, clearly visible, she holds a menu. It is not white. It is not laminated. It is cream-colored with text that is too small to read in the photograph. And in the lower right corner of the menu, barely visible, there appears to be an illustration of a lamb. Its eyes are closed. Some broadcasts are not meant to be heard. Crested Butte lies in a narrow valley in Gunnison County, Colorado, surrounded by the Elk Mountains and accessible by only one paved road that winds through the Gunnison National Forest. At an elevation of 8,900 feet, the town experiences winters that begin in October and often last until May, with snowfall regularly exceeding 200 inches per year. The valley's geography, steep mountain walls on three sides, a single outlet to the south, creates unusual atmospheric conditions that have long interested meteorologists and radio enthusiasts alike. The town was founded in 1880 as a coal mining camp, and by 1881 it had grown to support nearly 1,000 residents. The mines operated until 1952, when the last commercial coal operation closed. Crested Butte reinvented itself as a ski resort in the 1960s, and today it is known primarily for its Victorian architecture, its challenging slopes, and its isolation, a quality that has attracted artists, eccentrics, and those seeking distance from the wider world. It has also attracted radio operators. The valley's topography creates what enthusiasts call a radio shadow, a zone where certain frequencies behave unpredictably, bouncing off the surrounding peaks, amplifying some signals while swallowing others entirely. Ham radio operators have documented these anomalies since the 1950s, cataloging dead zones, echo points, and interference patterns that do not match any known model of radio wave propagation. It was in this context that the first Advent broadcast was recorded. On December 24, 1978, at 11:59 p.m., a radio operator named Randolph Svensson picked up an unusual signal on the 40-meter band. Svensson, a retired electrical engineer who had moved to Crested Butte in 1973, was conducting his nightly monitoring session when his receiver locked onto a frequency that should have been empty. A woman's voice emerged from the static. She spoke slowly, deliberately, with no discernible accent. She was reading what appeared to be a list. Eliza Thornwood, 14 Maple Street, 3. A pause, then another name. Samuel Kovac, 22 Ridgeline Road, 7. Another pause, another name. The list continued for approximately 4 minutes. Svensson counted 18 names before the broadcast ended with a single phrase spoken in the same measured tone, and none were found wanting. Then silence. Svensson recorded the broadcast on a reel-to-reel tape machine he kept connected to his equipment. He spent the following week attempting to identify the source. The frequency was not assigned to any licensed broadcaster. The signal strength suggested a nearby transmitter, but Crested Butte had no commercial radio stations and only a handful of amateur operators, none of whom claimed responsibility. He also attempted to verify the names and addresses. None matched any resident of Crested Butte or Gunnison County. None appeared in Colorado telephone directories. None could be found in any public record he consulted. Svensson filed a report with the Federal Communications Commission in January 1979, describing an unlicensed broadcast of unknown origin. The FCC acknowledged receipt of his report but took no action. His follow-up inquiries went unanswered. The following Christmas Eve at 11:59 p.m., the broadcast returned. Same frequency, same voice, different names. Margaret Hollister, 9 Birch Lane, 1. Theodore Yamamoto, 41 Crescent Avenue, 5. Annabelle Frost, 7 Willow Court, 9. The list ran for approximately 3.5 minutes. It ended with the same phrase, and none were found wanting. Svensson recorded this broadcast as well. He also invited 2 other local operators, Catherine Holt and Bernard Oduya, to monitor the frequency, independently, using their own equipment in their own homes. Both confirmed receiving the identical signal at the identical time. By 1985, a small network of radio enthusiasts had formed around the phenomenon. They called themselves the Crested Butte Monitoring Group, and each December 24th, they gathered at Svensson's cabin to record and analyze the broadcast. The signal arrived without fail at 11:59 p.m. The voice was always the same. The names were always different. The single-digit numbers assigned to each name ranged from 1 to 9, with no apparent pattern. "We tried everything," said Catherine Holt in a 1992 interview with a regional radio magazine. "We triangulated the signal using 3 separate receivers positioned around the valley. Every calculation pointed to the same location, Nicholson Lake, approximately 2 miles northeast of town, but the coordinates didn't correspond to any structure, any road, any feature we could identify. They corresponded to the middle of the lake." Nicholson Lake is a small alpine body of water, approximately 12 acres in surface area, fed by snowmelt from the surrounding peaks. It freezes solid each winter, with ice thickness often exceeding 3 feet. No structures have ever been built on its shores. No boats are permitted. The lake is not stocked with fish and has no recreational designation. In 1989, Bernard Oduya convinced a geologist friend from the Colorado School of Mines to conduct an informal survey of the lake using ground-penetrating radar. The survey was performed in January 1990, when the ice was at its thickest. The radar detected something at approximately 40 feet below the lake's surface. "It wasn't a natural formation," the geologist, Dr. Henrietta Volkoff, wrote in her personal notes. "The shape was too regular, roughly rectangular, approximately 15 feet by 8 feet. It could be a submerged structure, a vehicle, or debris from the mining era. But the radar signature was unusual. It showed density inconsistent with metal or wood. I cannot identify the material without direct sampling." Oduya and the monitoring group applied for a permit to conduct a dive survey of Nicholson Lake. The application was submitted to the Gunnison County Water Authority in March 1990. It was denied without explanation. A second application was submitted in 1992. Also denied. A third in 1995. Denied. The denial letters were identical in wording. The requested activity is not authorized at this time. No reason was given, no alternative was offered, and appeals were not acknowledged. "I spoke with a county official off the record in 1997, said Catherine Holt. "He told me the lake was protected, but couldn't tell me by whom or for what purpose. He said there were interests that did not want the lake disturbed. When I pressed him for specifics, he ended the conversation and never spoke to me again." Randolph Svensson died in 2004 at the age of 81. His collection of recordings, 26 annual broadcasts spanning 1978 to 2003, was donated to the University of Colorado's archives, where they remain uncatalogued and largely unexamined. The broadcasts have continued every year since his death. Local operators still monitor the frequency each Christmas Eve. The signal still arrives at 11:59 p.m. The voice is still the same, unchanged, unaged, after more than 4 decades. In 2017, a linguistics professor named Yusuf Anderson obtained copies of Svensson's recordings and subjected them to spectrographic analysis. His findings were inconclusive but unsettling. The voice shows no variation in pitch, cadence, or timbre across 26 years of recordings, Anderson wrote. This is physiologically impossible for a living human speaker. Even professional broadcasters show measurable changes in voice quality over decades. This voice does not change. It does not age. Either we are dealing with an extraordinarily sophisticated artificial reproduction, or we are dealing with something I cannot explain. The names read during the broadcast have never been identified. The addresses have never been verified. The single-digit numbers have never been decoded. Researchers have proposed theories, coded messages, psychological experiments, elaborate hoaxes, but none have gained traction, and the anomaly beneath Nicholson Lake has never been investigated. The permits have never been approved. The Water Authority has never explained its refusal. Each December 24th at 11:59 p.m., the broadcast begins again. A woman's voice, a list of names, a string of numbers, and always the same ending. And none were found wanting. Wanting for what? No one has ever determined. The voice does not elaborate. The signal does. Not return until the following year. Beneath the frozen surface of Nicholson Lake, 40 feet down, something waits in the darkness. It has been waiting since at least 1978, perhaps longer. And every Christmas Eve, it speaks. Some arrangements are not meant to be understood. Ouray occupies a small box canyon in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado, surrounded on three sides by 13,000-foot peaks that early settlers called the Switzerland of America. The town sits at an elevation of 7,792 feet, accessible by only two roads, one from the north through the Uncompahgre Gorge, one from the south over Red Mountain Pass, which closes frequently during winter storms. The canyon walls rise so steeply that direct sunlight reaches the town for only a few hours each winter day, leaving the streets in perpetual blue shadow from late November through February. The town was founded in 1876 during the silver boom and named for the Ute chief Ouray, who had negotiated peace between his people and the encroaching miners. By 1880, the population had swelled to nearly 3,000, supported by dozens of mines carved into the surrounding mountains. The boom ended, as booms do, and by the 1950s, Ouray had become a quiet community of fewer than 800 residents, sustained by tourism and the natural hot springs that bubble up through the canyon floor. Felon Park sits at the northern edge of town, a small triangle of grass and benches where 3rd Avenue meets the main road. It was named for a local businessman who donated the land in 1923. A gazebo was added in 1951, a war memorial in 1968. And in 1982, the town installed a nativity scene. The nativity was carved by a local artisan named Elias Johansson, a Norwegian immigrant who had settled in Ouray in 1964. Johansson was known for his meticulous craftsmanship, producing furniture and decorative pieces from native Colorado woods, aspen, blue spruce, juniper. The Nativity Commission took him 8 months to complete. The figures were carved from a single fallen cottonwood tree that had been struck by lightning near Box Canyon Falls. There were 12 pieces in all: Mary, Joseph, the infant Jesus, 3 wise men, 3 shepherds, 2 sheep, and an angel. Each figure stood approximately 2 feet tall, weighted with iron bases to prevent them from being stolen or toppled by wind. They were arranged in a traditional tableau, Mary and Joseph kneeling beside the manger, the wise men approaching from one side, the shepherds from another, the sheep at the periphery, the angel mounted on a wooden post overlooking the scene. The Nativity was displayed each year from December 24th through January 6th, the 12 days of Christmas. For the first 4 years, nothing unusual was reported. Then came 1986. On the morning of December 26th, a Parks Department employee named Rosa Gutierrez arrived at Felon Park to clear snow from the walkways. She noticed immediately that something was wrong. The nativity figures, which she had personally helped arrange on the 24th, had shifted position. The 3 wise men, originally placed at the eastern edge of the display, had moved approximately 5 inches closer to the manger. The shepherds had moved as well, not toward the center, but sideways, as if repositioning themselves to face a different direction. The angel had rotated slightly on its post, now looking toward the street rather than down at the infant. Gutierrez assumed vandals were responsible. She reported the incident to her supervisor, who filed a brief note but took no further action. The figures were not damaged, merely displaced, perhaps a prank, perhaps the wind. The following morning, the figures had moved again. This time, Gutierrez measured. The wise men had advanced another 4 inches. The shepherds had closed roughly 6 inches toward the center. The sheep, which had been positioned at the outer edges of the scene, were now noticeably closer to Mary and Joseph. The angel had rotated another 15 degrees. Gutierrez called the police. Officer Martin Kraus responded and examined the scene. He found no footprints in the snow around the nativity other than Gutierrez's own. The iron bases showed no drag marks, no scratches, no indication they had been lifted or pushed. The snow beneath each figure was undisturbed, as if the figures had simply appeared in their new positions without physically traversing the ground between. "I've seen a lot of strange things in this town," Kraus wrote in his incident report, "but I've never seen anything I couldn't explain. Until now." The movements continued each night through January 5th. By that date, all 12 figures had arranged themselves in a tight circle, approximately 3 feet in diameter, facing outward. The infant Jesus remained in the center, the manger now surrounded by the other figures like wagons circled against an unseen threat. The angel had descended from its post and stood among the others, facing the same direction as the rest, away from the center toward the darkness beyond. The formation was documented by Harold Yamamoto, a photographer for the Ouray County Plain Dealer, who had been following the story since December 28th. His photographs, published on January 6th, showed the progression clearly. A traditional nativity scene gradually contracting, the figures drawing closer night by night until they formed a protective ring around the empty manger. Empty because by January 5th, the infant Jesus figure had vanished. The carved baby was never found. A search of the park, the surrounding streets, and the nearby buildings produced nothing. The figure had not been broken or discarded. It had simply disappeared, leaving only the wooden manger where it had rested for 12 nights. Elias Johansson was contacted and agreed to carve a replacement. He completed it in February 1987, and the following Christmas, the Nativity was displayed again. The movements resumed. Each year from 1986 through the present, the Ouray Nativity has followed the same pattern. The figures shift position overnight during the 12 days of Christmas. They move between 3 and 7 inches per night, always toward the center, always ending in the same circular formation on January 5th. And each year, on the morning of January 6th, the infant Jesus figure is gone. Johansson carved 7 replacement infants before his death in 2001. His apprentice, a woman named Ingrid Solberg, has carved 11 more. Each one disappears. None has ever been recovered. Attempts to observe the movement directly have uniformly failed. In 1994, a group of University of Colorado engineering students installed motion-activated cameras around the Nativity as part of an independent study project. The cameras recorded every night from December 24th through January 5th. When the footage was reviewed, it showed the figures, stationary throughout each night, yet each morning measurements confirmed they had moved. The cameras were functioning perfectly, said Dr. Kenneth Ibarra, the faculty advisor who supervised the project. The timestamps were accurate, the footage was continuous, and yet the figures moved without appearing to move. I have no explanation for this. I have stopped trying to find one. In 2008, a materials scientist named Dr. Lucia Papadopoulos conducted a detailed analysis of the figures themselves, searching for any mechanism that might explain the movements: hidden motors, magnetic components, expanding materials responsive to temperature changes. She found nothing. The figures were solid wood, weighted with iron, finished with standard lacquer. There was no technology involved. There was no trick. "These are just carvings," Papadopoulos concluded. "Beautiful carvings, but ordinary in every measurable respect. Wood does not move on its own, except apparently here it does." The town of Ouray has never officially acknowledged the phenomenon. The Parks Department continues to display the Nativity each year, arranging the figures in their traditional positions on December 24th and documenting their final positions on January 6th. The documentation is filed but not publicized. Requests for comment are politely declined. Some residents have theories. A few believe the movements are an elaborate hoax, perpetuated by unknown parties for unknown reasons. Others suggest the lightning-struck cottonwood from which the figures were carved carried some residual energy, some imprint of the violence that felled it. A smaller number whisper about older things, about the Ute stories of spirits that inhabit the canyon walls, about the miners who died in the mountains above, about the price of building a town in a place that was never meant to be settled. Ingrid Solberg, who has carved more replacement infants than anyone, offered her own perspective in a 2019 interview. Elias always said the wood chose its own shape, she said. He said a carver doesn't create, a carver reveals. Maybe he revealed something in that cottonwood that was already there. Maybe it's still there, still moving, still trying to show us something we don't have the eyes to see. She paused, looking out the window toward the mountains. I carve the infant every year. I know it will disappear. I carve it anyway, because that's what the wood asks for. And I've learned not to argue with the wood. The Nativity was displayed again this past December. The figures moved, as they always do. On January 5th, they stood in their circle, facing outward, surrounding the manger where the infant had been. On January 6th, the manger was empty. Somewhere in Ouray, or beyond it, or beneath it, or in some place that has no name, there are 19 carved wooden infants. They were placed in the center of a circle. They were surrounded by figures that moved to protect them. And then they were taken. By what, no one knows. For what purpose, no one can say. The figures remain silent. They move only when no one is watching. And each year they form their circle again, facing the darkness, guarding a center that is always, always empty. Some roads remember journeys that never ended. Independence Pass crosses the Continental Divide at an elevation of 12,095 feet, making it the highest paved crossing in Colorado and one of the highest in North America. The road connects Aspen on the western slope to Twin Lakes on the eastern side, winding for approximately 40 miles through alpine tundra, glacial valleys, and terrain so exposed that trees cannot survive. The pass was originally a wagon route used by miners during the silver boom of the 1880s, when men and mules hauled ore through conditions that killed dozens each winter. The modern highway, designated State Route 82, was completed in 1927. It is maintained by the Colorado Department of Transportation, which closes the road each year when snowfall makes passage impossible, typically in early November, and reopens it in late May when crews have cleared the accumulated drifts. During the closure, the pass is legally off-limits to civilian traffic, accessible only to maintenance crews conducting structural inspections and avalanche control. It is these crews who have documented the tracks. The first recorded observation occurred in January of 1983. A three-person maintenance team, led by Supervisor Harold Benitez, was conducting a routine inspection of the road surface near the summit, checking for frost heave and rockfall damage. The team had traveled by snowcat from the western closure gate, a journey of approximately 12 miles through fresh powder that had fallen overnight. Approximately 1 mile east of the summit, Benitez noticed something in the snow ahead. He stopped the snowcat and stepped out to investigate. Two parallel lines ran across the road surface, spaced approximately 4 feet apart, consistent with the runners of a horse-drawn sleigh. The lines emerged from the snowbank on the northern side of the road, crossed the pavement, and continued south toward the edge of the highway. Beyond the guardrail, which at this location was partially buried in a drift, the terrain dropped sharply into a glacial cirque, a sheer descent of approximately 2,000 feet to the valley floor. The tracks led directly to the edge, and there they stopped. There were no hoof prints, Benitez wrote in his incident report. No footprints, no indication of how the sleigh had arrived at that point or what had pulled it. The track simply began at the snowbank, crossed the road, and ended at the cliff. As if something had emerged from the mountain, crossed our path, and gone over the edge. Benitez photographed the tracks and measured their dimensions. The runners were approximately 3 inches wide, with a depth of 2 inches, consistent with a loaded sleigh traveling at moderate speed. The snow in the tracks was compacted but not iced, suggesting the passage had occurred within the previous 12 hours after the fresh snowfall had ended. The team searched the cliff edge with binoculars but saw nothing in the cirque below, no wreckage, no debris, no disturbance in the snow at the valley floor. They completed their inspection and returned to the maintenance station in Aspen, where Benitez filed his report with a notation requesting follow-up investigation. No investigation was conducted. The report was filed and forgotten. Similar tracks were documented in 1987, 1991, 1994, and 1996. Each time the pattern was identical, parallel runner lines emerging from the northern snowbank, crossing the road, terminating at the cliff edge. Each time no hoofprints or footprints accompanied the tracks. Each time no evidence of impact was visible in the valley below. The 1996 observation was different. On February 3rd of that year, a maintenance crew was dispatched to the pass following a report of potential avalanche damage near the summit. The crew consisted of 2 members, driver Patricia Fontaine and technician Marcus Oyalaran. They departed the western gate at 7:45 a.m. in a Department of Transportation Snowcat, equipped with standard emergency gear, including a handheld GPS unit for location documentation. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Fontaine and Oyalaran encountered fresh sleigh tracks at the same location where Benitez had observed them 13 years earlier. The tracks followed the same trajectory, emerging from the northern snowbank, crossing the road, ending at the cliff. Oyalaran volunteered to follow the tracks on foot to document their origin point. He clipped a radio to his belt, activated his GPS unit, and began walking north along the runner lines, tracing them back toward the snowbank from which they appeared to emerge. He walked for approximately 200 yards. The tracks led uphill, away from the road, into terrain that grew increasingly steep. Oyalaran reported by radio that the tracks showed no sign of ending. They continued up the slope as far as he could see, disappearing into a shallow ravine that ran parallel to the ridgeline. Then he reported hearing bells. "Small bells," he said over the radio, "like harness bells, behind me." Fontaine, monitoring from the snowcat, asked him to repeat. "Bells," Oyalaran said. "I can hear them behind me, but there's no one there. I've been checking. There's no one on this mountain but us." Fontaine instructed him to return to the snowcat immediately. Oyalaran acknowledged and began walking back down the slope. He reported that the bells continued throughout his descent, always behind him, always at the same distance, never closer, never farther. When he reached the snowcat, the bells stopped. "As soon as I touched the door handle," Oyalaran said in a later interview, "complete silence, like someone had turned off a switch. I looked back up the slope and saw nothing. Just snow, just tracks, just empty mountain." The incident might have ended there, as the others had, filed and forgotten. But Fontaine noticed something when they returned to the maintenance station. Oyalaran's GPS unit showed no movement during the 45 minutes he had been on foot. According to the device's log, Oyalaran had remained stationary at the initial coordinates, the point where he had stepped out of the snowcat, for the entire duration of his hike. The unit had recorded timestamps every 30 seconds. Every entry showed the same location. Every entry showed zero movement. The unit was functioning normally before and after, said Department of Transportation technician Wendy Nakamura, who examined the device. There was no malfunction, no battery issue, no software error. According to this GPS, Marcus never moved. But I saw the footprints myself when we went back the next day. He walked up that slope. He came back down. The prints were there. The GPS simply didn't record it. The Department of Transportation has never officially commented on the sleigh tracks of Independence Pass. Incident reports from 1983 through 1996 are preserved in the agency's archives but have not been released publicly. Requests under the Colorado Open Records Act have been denied on the grounds that the documents relate to ongoing safety assessments of the highway. Independent researchers have found references to similar phenomena in older documents. A 1912 letter from a silver miner named Gunnar Lindqvist, preserved in the Aspen Historical Society, describes seeing sleigh ruts in the high snow where no sleigh could go during a February crossing of the pass. An 1891 newspaper clipping from the Aspen Daily Times mentions a mail carrier who reported hearing Christmas bells while crossing Independence Pass in January, weeks after the holiday had ended. And in the archives of the Twin Lakes community, there is a single entry in the 1909 town ledger that has never been explained. It reads, December 24th. The Harmon sleigh departed for Aspen at dawn. Expected arrival. Sundown. Never arrived. No trace. The pass does not give back what it takes. No Harmon family appears in Twin Lakes census records from that era. No missing persons report was filed. No search was conducted. The pass closes each November. It opens each May. And in the months between, when the snow lies deep and the road belongs to no one, the tracks continue to appear. They emerge from the snowbank. They cross the road. They end at the cliff. And somewhere in the silence of 12,000 feet, bells ring for a sleigh that never arrives, on a journey that never ends, carrying passengers whose names were lost before anyone thought to write them down. Marcus Oyelaran retired from the Department of Transportation in 2008. He has never returned to Independence Pass. When asked about the bells, he offers the same response he has given for nearly 30 years. I heard them. I know I heard them, and I know they were following me. He pauses. But I also know that when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just snow, just silence, and tracks that led to the edge of the world. Some meals are prepared for guests who never arrive. Marble sits at the end of a dead-end road in Gunnison County, Colorado, population fewer than 150, surrounded by the Elk Mountains and accessible only through a narrow valley that closes entirely during the heaviest winter storms. The town exists because of stone, specifically the deposit of pure white metamorphic rock that gives the community its name and once supplied material for the Lincoln Memorial, the tomb of the unknown soldier, and dozens of other monuments across America. The Ewell Marble Quarry opened in 1885 on the slopes of White House Mountain, approximately 3 miles from the town center. At its peak in the early 1910s, the operation employed over 700 workers and produced some of the finest decorative stone in the world. A finishing mill was constructed in marble itself, connected to the quarry by a narrow-gauge railroad that hauled rough blocks down the mountainside. The industry supported hotels, boarding houses, a hospital, and a population that briefly exceeded 1,500. The boom ended with the Great Depression. The quarry closed in 1941, reopened briefly in the 1990s for limited extraction, and has remained largely dormant since 2004. The finishing mill burned in 1926 and was never rebuilt. The railroad was dismantled for scrap. Today, the quarry is a vast open wound in the mountainside. Terraced white walls rising 200 feet, flooded in places by groundwater, silent except for the wind that funnels through the canyon. It is from this place that the smell of wood smoke drifts down each Christmas morning. The first documented account comes from Eleanor Fitzpatrick, who moved to Marble in 1967 with her husband, a sculptor who worked with the remaining stockpiles of quarry stone. In a letter to her sister dated January 3, 1968, Fitzpatrick described waking on Christmas morning to the unmistakable smell of a cook fire, wood smoke, and something savory like a roast. She assumed a neighbor was preparing an early dinner, but when she stepped onto her porch, she noticed the smoke was coming from the wrong direction, not from the houses along the main road, but from the mountain, from the quarry. Thomas thought I was imagining it, she wrote, but he smelled it too eventually. We both did. It lasted perhaps an hour, then faded. We asked the Hendersons next door if they had noticed. They had not. We asked the Muellers. Nothing. It was as if only we could smell it. Thomas said the mountain plays tricks in winter. I am not so certain it was a trick. Similar accounts accumulated over the following decades. Not every Christmas, but many. Not every resident, but enough. The reports followed a consistent pattern. The smell of wood smoke and cooking food, always on Christmas morning, always seeming to originate from the direction of the quarry, always fading within an hour or two. In 1984, a group of teenagers decided to investigate. 3 boys, Derek Johansen, Samuel Achebe, and William Trujillo, hiked to the quarry on Christmas afternoon, following the old railroad grade that switchbacked up the mountainside. The temperature was approximately 18 degrees Fahrenheit. With 6 inches of fresh snow on the ground, they reached the main quarry pit at approximately 2 p.m. What they found made no sense. In the center of the quarry floor, approximately 50 feet from the frozen pool that occupied the lowest level, a ring of stones had been arranged in a circle roughly 4 feet in diameter. The stones were marble fragments, pale and smooth, similar to thousands of others scattered across the site. But these stones were warm. I put my hand on one and pulled it back, Derek Johansen recalled in a 2012 interview. It wasn't hot, not burning, but it was warm. Like it had been sitting in the sun for hours, except there was no sun. It was overcast, freezing, late afternoon in December. Those stones should have been ice cold. They weren't. At the center of the ring, resting on a flat piece of marble that might have been a natural shelf or a deliberately placed surface, was a plate. It was white ceramic, chipped at one edge, the kind of plain dinnerware found in any household. On the plate was a serving of sliced meat, roasted, brown at the edges, pink at the center, accompanied by what appeared to be roasted potatoes and a small portion of carrots. Steam rose from the food. The boys did not touch the plate. They did not approach closer than approximately 10 feet. Samuel Achebe later said he had wanted to leave the moment he saw it, that something about the arrangement felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. William Trujillo said he felt watched, though he saw no one and heard nothing but the wind. They photographed the scene with a disposable camera Derek had received as a Christmas gift. Then they left, returning to town as quickly as the terrain allowed. When the photographs were developed a week later, the images showed the quarry, the snow, the pale walls rising toward the sky. The ring of stones was visible. The flat marble surface was visible. The plate was not there. In every photograph, the space where the plate had rested was empty. The boys told their families what they had seen. Some believed them, most did not. No adult returned to the quarry to verify their account. The snow continued to fall, and by New Year's Day, any evidence would have been buried. But the following Christmas, Derek Johansen's father, a skeptic who had dismissed his son's story, woke to the smell of wood smoke drifting down from the mountain. Over the years, a handful of others have made the Christmas trek to the quarry. Their accounts vary in detail, but share certain elements. The warm stones are almost always present, arranged in the same circular pattern. The plate appears intermittently. Some years it is there, some years it is not. When present, it always contains what appears to be a freshly prepared meal, still steaming, never touched. No footprints have ever been observed leading to or from the stone circle. The snow around the site is always undisturbed, as if the arrangement had materialized without anyone physically creating it. In 2003, a geology professor named Dr. Hannah Lindqvist conducted an informal investigation at the request of a former student who had grown up in Marble. She visited the quarry on December 26th, one day after Christmas, and found the stone circle intact. The stones were cold by then, indistinguishable in temperature from the surrounding debris. There was no plate. But Dr. Lindqvist noticed something the earlier observers had not mentioned. Scratched into the surface of the flat marble slab at the center of the ring were markings. They were faint, weathered, difficult to see except in low-angle light. Dr. Lindqvist photographed them and later consulted with colleagues in linguistics and archaeology. The markings did not correspond to any known alphabet. They were not Native American petroglyphs, not mining symbols, not graffiti. They appeared to be intentional, carved with some degree of precision, but their meaning, if they had meaning, remained opaque. "I cannot determine their age or origin," Dr. Lindqvist wrote in her notes. "They could be decades old or over a century. The weathering patterns are ambiguous. I can only say that someone, at some point, placed these stones in this configuration and marked this surface. Why they did so, and why the phenomenon persists, I cannot explain." The quarry remains privately owned but unguarded, accessible to anyone willing to make the winter hike. The town of Marble has never officially acknowledged the Christmas phenomenon. There are no signs, no historical markers, no mention in the promotional materials distributed by the County Tourism Board. But residents know. They smell the smoke each Christmas morning, drifting down from the mountain, carrying the scent of a meal that no one is cooking for guests who never come. Some have theories. The quarry workers who died in accidents over the decades, crushed by falling stone, frozen in sudden storms, buried by avalanche. The Italian immigrants who formed the backbone of the workforce, far from home, celebrating holidays in a frozen wilderness that must have felt like exile. The possibility that rituals were performed, traditions maintained, in the years before the quarry fell silent. But theories are not explanations, and explanations in Marble are in short supply. The smoke rises, the stones grow warm, the plate appears, steaming, untouched, an offering to something or someone that has never been identified and never will be. And each Christmas afternoon, when the smell has faded and the mountain stands silent, again the people of Marble return to their homes and their families and their own holiday meals, trying not to think about who or what is eating alone in the quarry above, if indeed anyone is eating at all. Some records were never meant to survive. Silverton lies at the bottom of a narrow valley in the San Juan Mountains, surrounded by peaks that exceed 13,000 feet and accessible by only one road, a winding 50-mile route from Durango that climbs through canyons so steep the sun touches the valley floor for mere hours each winter day. At an elevation of 9,318 feet, it is one of the highest incorporated towns in the United States, a place where winter arrives in October and does not release its grip until May. The town was founded in 1874 during the silver rush that gave it its name, silver by the ton, the early boosters claimed, though the reality proved more modest. By 1880, Silverton had become the commercial hub of San Juan County, supporting a network of mines scattered across the surrounding peaks. Surveyors were essential to the industry, mapping claims, establishing boundaries, and documenting the terrain. That would determine which men became rich and which men died trying. Elias Croft arrived in Silverton in the spring of 1887. He was 34 years old, a trained surveyor from Pennsylvania who had worked previously in the Wyoming Territory and the Montana goldfields. His references described him as meticulous, sober, and unusually skilled at navigating terrain that defeated lesser men. He was hired by the county to survey unmapped sections of the high country, areas that had been prospected but never formally documented. For 2 years, Croft worked without incident. His surveys were precise, his reports thorough, his conduct unremarkable. He boarded at the Grand Imperial Hotel, attended Methodist services on Sundays, and was known to play chess at the Miners' Union Hall on Saturday evenings. He kept a personal journal in addition to his official survey records, a habit that would later prove significant. In November of 1889, Croft was assigned to survey a remote drainage northwest of Silverton, in the high country between Sultan Mountain and the headwaters of the Animas River. The area was difficult to access, prone to early snowfall, and had resisted previous mapping efforts due to what earlier surveyors described as confusing topography, canyons that seemed to lead nowhere, ridgelines that defied logical orientation, drainage patterns that contradicted established hydrology. Croft departed Silverton on November 15th with supplies for 3 weeks. He was expected to return by December 8th. He did not return until December 27th, and he did not return alive. His body was discovered on the morning of December 27th by a mail carrier named Tobias Reinhold, who found Croft sitting upright against a boulder approximately 2 miles north of town on the main road. He was frozen solid, his eyes open, his hands folded in his lap. His pack was beside him, neatly arranged. His surveying equipment was accounted for. His compass lay on the ground next to his right hand, the needle spinning in slow, continuous circles despite no apparent mechanical damage. The county coroner ruled the death as exposure. Croft had likely become disoriented in a storm, the report concluded, and succumbed to hypothermia while attempting to reach town. The case was closed within a week. But Croft's journal told a different story. The journal was recovered from his pack and eventually donated to the San Juan County Historical Society, where it remains today. It is a small leather-bound volume, approximately 120 pages, filled with Croft's precise handwriting. The entries covering his final survey begin on November 15th and continue through December 24th. 40 days of observations, measurements, and increasingly disturbing notes. The early entries are routine. Croft documents his progress through the high country, describes the terrain, records weather conditions and wildlife. Observations. On November 23rd, he notes reaching a previously unmapped box canyon approximately 8 miles northwest of Silverton, accessible through a narrow cleft in a granite ridgeline. The canyon, he writes, is approximately 1 mile long and half a mile wide, with walls rising 600 feet on 3 sides. A frozen stream runs through its center. The floor is covered in alpine meadow, brown with winter dormancy. And grazing on that meadow, Croft observed something unexpected. Reindeer. 12 animals, he writes on November 23rd, unmistakably Rangifer tarandus. Antlered, healthy, apparently wild. This is extraordinary. No reindeer population exists in Colorado. No rancher in the region has reported keeping such animals. I have no explanation for their presence. Croft spent the next 3 weeks studying the herd. His journal entries become increasingly detailed and increasingly strange. He sketches the animals, documents their behavior, attempts to approach them for closer observation. The reindeer, he notes, are unusually docile, showing no fear of humans. They allow him to come within 20 feet before moving away, and even then they do not flee. They simply reposition themselves at a consistent distance, always watching. On December 12th, Croft records his first count discrepancy. Counted the herd this morning, 13 animals. Yesterday there were 12. I have recounted 3 times. 13. One animal appears different from the others, slightly larger, darker in coloration, positioned always at the edge of the group. I cannot account for its appearance. No tracks lead into the canyon. No tracks lead out. Over the following days, Croft becomes fixated on the 13th animal. His entries grow shorter, more fragmented. He describes difficulty sleeping. He reports hearing sounds at night. Bells, or something like bells, though there is nothing here to make such a sound. He notes that his compass has begun, behaving erratically, the needle refusing to settle on north. On December 20th, he writes, "The 13th watches me. The others graze, sleep, move as animals do. The 13th only watches. Its eyes do not blink. I have observed it for 6 hours. It does not blink." On December 22nd, "Tried to leave the canyon today. The passage I entered through is gone. I have walked the perimeter 3 times. There is no exit. The walls are unbroken. This is not possible. I surveyed the entrance myself. I have the measurements in my notes." On December 23rd, "Food running low. The reindeer have moved closer to my camp, all 13 of them. They stand in a semicircle approximately 30 feet away. They do not graze. They wait." The final entry is dated December 24th, Christmas Eve. Counted again, 13 now. One is not an animal. The entry ends there. The following 16 pages of the journal have been removed, cut cleanly, as if with a razor, leaving only narrow strips of paper along the binding. No one knows what those pages contained. No one knows who removed them, or when, or why. Croft's official survey notes, filed separately from his personal journal, make no mention of the canyon, the reindeer, or any unusual observations. They document routine work in the surrounding terrain and end on December 10th, 2 weeks before his death. The canyon he described does not appear on any map produced before or since his survey. Modern topographical surveys of the area northwest of Silverton show no box canyon matching Croft's description. Satellite imagery reveals no hidden valleys, no unmapped drainages, no terrain features that could accommodate the location he documented. Either Croft invented the canyon entirely, an explanation inconsistent with his established reputation for accuracy, or the canyon has somehow ceased to exist. The San Juan County Historical Society has fielded inquiries about the Croft Journal for over a century. They do not display it publicly. They do not permit photography. Researchers who have examined the document describe it as genuine. The paper, ink, and handwriting all consistent with the period, but unsettling in ways that are difficult to articulate. The later entries have a quality I can only describe as desperate, wrote historian Margaret Oduya in a 1994 analysis. Croft was a rational man, trained in precise observation. Whatever he experienced in that canyon, it eroded that rationality completely. By the end, he was no longer documenting. He was confessing. The reindeer, of course, have never been found. No wild population of Rangifer tarandus has ever been documented in Colorado. No rancher has ever reported losing such animals. No explanation has ever been offered for what Croft saw or believed he saw in his final weeks. His compass remains in the Historical Society's collection, displayed alongside the journal. Visitors occasionally report that the needle still moves, drifting slowly in circles, never settling, never pointing north. Most dismiss this as imagination. Compasses do not spin on their own. Canyons do not vanish. Reindeer do not appear in places where no reindeer should be. But Elias Croft documented what he observed. He counted 12 animals, then 13. He noted that one was different. He wrote his final entry on Christmas Eve, alone in a canyon that no longer exists, surrounded by creatures that watched and waited. One is not an animal. He never explained what he meant. The 16 missing pages never surfaced. And somewhere in the high country above Silverton, in terrain that maps insist is empty, the count may still be wrong. Some gatherings occur without invitation. Keystone Resort occupies a broad valley in Summit County, Colorado, approximately 75 miles west of Denver along Interstate 70. The resort spans 3 mountains, Durkheim, North Peak, and the Outback, and includes over 3,000 acres of skiable terrain, multiple villages, and a network of cross-country trails that wind through lodgepole pine forests at elevations between 9,000 and 12,000 feet. In winter, the valley receives an average of 230 inches of snowfall, transforming the landscape into a frozen wilderness that draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each season. The Nordic Center sits at the western edge of the resort, near the base of the cross-country trail system. It is a modest structure, a warming hut, equipment rental, a small cafe, designed to serve skiers who prefer the quiet of the backcountry to the crowds of the alpine slopes. Behind the center, accessible by a short path, through the trees is a clearing approximately 100 feet in diameter. In summer, it serves as a picnic area. In winter, it is typically empty, visited only by the occasional skier who wanders off the groomed trails. It was in this clearing that the sculptures first appeared. On the morning of December 25, 2011, maintenance worker Gabriel Okonkwo arrived at the Nordic Center at 5:45 a.m. to begin his shift. His duties included clearing snow from the entrance, checking the heating system, and ensuring the trails were accessible for early morning skiers. As part of his routine, he walked the perimeter of the building to inspect for overnight damage. When he reached the rear of the center and looked toward the clearing, he stopped. Standing in the pre-dawn darkness, illuminated by the glow of the building's exterior lights, were figures. Human figures. Approximately a dozen of them, arranged in small groups across the clearing, motionless against the snow. Okonkwo's first thought was that guests had wandered into the area and frozen to death. He ran toward the clearing, his boots punching through the fresh powder, his breath visible in the 18-degree air. It was only when he reached the nearest figure that he understood what he was seeing. They were made of ice. The figure before him was a woman, perhaps 40 years old, rendered in crystalline detail. Her hair fell in frozen waves past her shoulders. Her dress, some kind of formal gown, draped in folds that caught the light. Her face was tilted slightly upward, her lips parted as if in mid-conversation. Her eyes, carved from the same clear ice as the rest of her, seemed to hold an expression of quiet anticipation. Okonkwo circled the figure slowly, his shock giving way to confusion. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Beyond extraordinary, he could see individual eyelashes. He could see the creases in her knuckles, the subtle veins on the backs of her hands, the texture of fabric that did not exist. The sculpture was not stylized or abstracted. It was precise, anatomically, impossibly precise. He counted 11 figures in total. Men, women, children. Some stood alone. Others were grouped in clusters of 2 or 3, positioned as if engaged in conversation or preparing to dance. A man in a suit extended his hand toward a woman in a gown. 2 children faced each other with arms raised, frozen in a gesture that might have been a game. An elderly couple stood side by side, their shoulders almost touching, their faces turned toward something beyond the edge of the clearing. There were no footprints in the snow around the sculptures, no tool marks on the ice, no blocks or shavings or any indication of how the figures had been created. The snow in the clearing was undisturbed except for Okonkwo's own tracks. He photographed the sculptures with his phone and reported the discovery to his supervisor, a woman named Ingrid Halverson. She arrived at the clearing 40 minutes later and confirmed what Okonkwo had seen. She also noted something he had missed in the pre-dawn darkness. The sculptures were not standing on the snow. They were standing in it. Their feet, detailed down to the bones beneath the skin, were submerged approximately 2 inches below the surface, as if they had been present when the snow fell and had remained stationary while the accumulation built up around them. Resort management was notified. Security conducted a review of overnight camera footage from the Nordic Center. The cameras covered the building's entrances and parking area, but not the clearing itself. No unusual activity was recorded. No vehicles had arrived after closing. No individuals had been observed approaching the area. By noon, the sculptures had begun to melt. The temperature rose to 34 degrees, and by 3 p.m., the figures had lost their definition, collapsing into formless mounds of ice that would disappear entirely by the following morning. No samples were preserved. No detailed measurements were taken. The incident was logged as unexplained vandalism and quietly set aside. The sculptures returned the following Christmas, and the Christmas after that. Between 2011 and 2023, the ice sculpture garden has appeared 5 times: 2011, 2015, 2018, 2021, and 2023. Not every year, not on any predictable schedule, but always on Christmas morning, always in the same clearing, always discovered by maintenance staff arriving for early shifts. The number of figures varies: 11 in 2011, 14 in 2015, 9 in 2018, 17 in 2021, 12 in 2023. The poses change as well, different groupings, different gestures, different implied activities. But the craftsmanship remains consistent, impossible. Detail, no tool marks, no footprints, no explanation. In 2015, maintenance worker Thomas Reinhold documented the sculptures extensively, taking over 60 photographs from multiple angles. He was particularly fascinated by the level of detail, the individual teeth visible in a child's open-mouthed smile, the fingernails on an extended hand, the wrinkles around the eyes of an elderly man. When he reviewed the photographs that evening, he noticed something disturbing. The figures were not in the same positions. The differences were subtle. A hand raised slightly higher than he remembered, a head turned a few degrees to the left, a child's arm lowered from its original gesture. Reinhold compared photographs taken minutes apart and found consistent discrepancies. The sculptures appeared to be moving between shots, shifting incrementally in the moments when his camera was pointed elsewhere. He reported this observation to resort management and was told to take the remainder of the week off. When he returned, his photographs had been deleted from the resort's servers. His personal copies remained on his phone, but when he attempted to upload them to social media, his account was suspended for violating community guidelines. He has since left Keystone and declined interview requests. The resort has never officially acknowledged the ice sculpture garden. Inquiries to the Public Relations Department are met with standard denials. No such event has occurred. No sculptures have been documented. The claims are the product of misidentification or fabrication. But workers talk, stories circulate, and certain patterns have emerged from the accumulated accounts. The sculptures always depict people in formal attire, suits, gowns, clothing appropriate for a celebration or ceremony. The poses always suggest social interaction, dancing, conversation, greeting. The figures always face inward, toward each other or toward the center of the clearing, as if attending an event invisible to outside observers. And the faces, according to those who have seen them closely, are never generic. They are specific, individual. The kind of faces that belong to real people, people with histories and names and lives that existed somewhere at some time. In 2019, a local historian named Dr. Yuki Anderson obtained descriptions of the sculptures from 3 separate witnesses and attempted to match the faces to historical photographs from Summit County. She found no definitive matches, but she noted an unsettling pattern. Several of the described figures resembled individuals who had died in the area during the late 19th and early 20th centuries: miners, settlers, children lost to disease or accident. "I cannot prove a connection," Dr. Anderson wrote in her unpublished notes. But the resemblances are striking. A woman matching the description of Clara Johansson, who died in childbirth in 1892. A child resembling the Whitfield boy, lost in an avalanche in 1907. An elderly man who could be Reverend Marcus Holbrook, who froze to death on Christmas Eve, 1914, while traveling between mining camps. She paused her research in 2020 and has not resumed it. The clearing behind the Nordic Center remains accessible to visitors, though few venture there during the winter months. The snow accumulates undisturbed. The trees stand silent. The space waits, empty, for 364 days of the year. And then, on certain Christmas mornings, it is not empty anymore. Figures stand in the pre-dawn darkness. Men, women, children, dressed for a celebration that no one remembers scheduling. They face each other in poses of greeting and joy, frozen in ice, so clear it captures the starlight, so detailed it captures the dead. By afternoon, they are gone. By evening, only meltwater remains, seeping into the snow, leaving no trace of what stood there. But the workers who find them remember. They remember the faces. They remember the fingernails and the teeth and the eyelashes. And they remember the feeling, described by every witness, that the figures were not sculptures at all. They were guests, arriving for a party that began long ago and has never truly ended. Some records keep themselves. Georgetown lies in a narrow canyon along Clear Creek, approximately 45 miles west of Denver, on the old wagon road that once connected the plains to the silver mines of the high country. At an elevation of 8,519 feet, the town clings to the valley floor between mountains that rise another 4,000 feet on either side, their slopes scarred by the remnants of mining operations that defined the region for half a century. The canyon is so narrow in places that the sun reaches the main street for only a few hours each winter day, leaving the town in perpetual blue shadow from November through March. The town was founded in 1859 during the Colorado Gold Rush, though it was silver that would make Georgetown famous. By 1880, it had grown to become the third largest city in Colorado, home to over 5,000 residents and dozens of hotels, saloons, and businesses, catering to miners, merchants, and travelers passing through on their way to Leadville and beyond. The wealth was visible in the architecture. Ornate Victorian buildings with imported fixtures, gas lighting, and amenities that rivaled establishments in Denver. The Hôtel de Paris was the crown jewel of Georgetown's hospitality industry. Built in 1875 by a French immigrant named Louis Dupuy, the hotel offered accommodations and cuisine that attracted guests from across the country. Dupuy was a perfectionist and an eccentric, known for turning away guests he deemed unsuitable and for maintaining meticulous records of every aspect of his operation. He ran the hotel until his death in 1900, after which it passed through a series of owners before becoming a museum in 1954. It is in the museum's archives, stored in a climate-controlled room in the hotel's basement, that the ledger was discovered. The ledger was found in 1987 by a volunteer archivist named Dorothy Kaminsky, who was cataloging documents from the hotel's early years. It was a standard accounting book, bound in brown leather, approximately 12 inches by 8 inches, with lined pages and a faded label on the cover that read simply, "Christmas Accounts." The first entry was dated December 1879. The final entry bore no date at all. Kaminsky initially assumed the ledger documented holiday expenses, gifts for staff, seasonal decorations, special menu items. The first few pages seem to confirm this assumption, listing purchases of candied fruits, brandy, flour, and other ingredients consistent with holiday baking. But as she progressed through the document, she noticed something unusual. Beginning in 1881, the ledger included a separate section titled Seasonal Cake Recipients. Each entry listed a guest's name, their room number, their home city, and a brief notation about their stay. Beside each name was a second column, added in different ink, containing a date and a brief description. Jonathan Mercer, Room 7, Boston, pleasant disposition, December 25, 1881. And then, in the second column, December 25, 1882, drowned, Lake Champlain. Adelaide Whitmore, Room 12, Philadelphia, requested extra blankets, December 24, 1882. Second column, December 24, 1883. House fire, 3 dead. Frederick Lindquist, Room 4, Chicago, complained of draft, December 25, 1883. Second column, December 25, 1884, mine collapse, Comstock. Kaminsky counted 47 entries spanning 1881 to 1903. Each entry followed the same pattern: a guest who had received a complimentary fruitcake during their Christmas stay, followed by a notation of their death exactly 1 year later. The causes varied: accidents, illness, violence, disaster, but the timing was invariant, precisely 1 year to the day. "I thought it was a morbid joke at first," Kaminsky said in a 1992 interview with a Denver newspaper. "Some clerk with a dark sense of humor inventing deaths to match the guest list. But then I started checking. I found obituaries for 11 of the names. Every single one matched the ledger. The dates, the causes, everything. These people were real, and they died exactly when the ledger said they did." Kaminsky shared her discovery with the museum's director, a historian named Harold Achterberg, who conducted his own verification. He confirmed 17 of the 47 deaths through newspaper archives, census records, and correspondence with historical societies in other states. In each case, the cause and date of death matched the ledger's notation precisely. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive, Achterberg noted in his unpublished report. The primary entries, the guest names and room numbers, appear to be in Louis Dupuy's hand, which we can verify from other hotel documents. But the second column, the death notations, is different. The penmanship is similar but not identical. It could be Dupuy writing at a different time, with a different pen in a different state of mind. Or it could be someone else entirely. The question of when the death notations were added remains unresolved. If they were written after the deaths occurred, the ledger is merely a disturbing but explicable record, someone tracking the fates of former guests for unknown reasons. But certain details suggest a more troubling possibility. Several entries include information that would not have been publicly available at the time of death. Adelaide Whitmore's house fire, for instance, was reported in Philadelphia newspapers, but the detail that 3 dead included her 2 children was not published until a memorial notice appeared 6 months later. The ledger entry, written in the same ink as the surrounding entries, includes this detail as if it were already known. Frederick Lindquist's death in a mine collapse at the Comstock Lode was reported as a single fatality among 7 miners. But the ledger entry specifies crushed lower gallery, northeast shaft, details that appeared only in an internal company report that was never made public and was presumed lost until a copy surfaced in 1968. Either the person writing these entries had access to information that shouldn't have existed, Achterberg wrote, or they were written before the events they describe. The ledger's final entry is the most disturbing. It lists a guest named Walter Henriksen, Room 9, from St. Louis. The notation reads, December 25, 1903, quiet, asked about the history of the cake. The second column contains a date, December 25, 1904, but no cause of death. Instead, there is a single word, Georgetown. Below this entry, in handwriting that is noticeably shakier than the previous entries, is a final notation. Must stop. They know we are counting. The page ends there. The remaining pages of the ledger are blank. Walter Henriksen was a real person. Records confirm he was a traveling salesman from St. Louis who visited Georgetown in December 1903. He returned to the town the following Christmas, checking into the Hôtel de Paris on December 23, 1904. On December 25, 1904, he left the hotel at approximately 9 a.m., telling the front desk clerk he intended to take a walk along Clear Creek. He was never seen again. A search was conducted over the following week. The creek was dragged. The surrounding hills were scoured. Henriksen's belongings remained in his room, his bill unpaid, his return ticket to St. Louis unused. No trace of him was ever found. No body, no clothing, no indication of where he had gone or what had happened to him. The case was officially closed in 1906, listed as a probable drowning despite the absence of evidence. Henriksen's family in St. Louis received his personal effects but no answers. His name appears in Georgetown's historical records only as a footnote, one of several individuals who vanished in the area during the early 20th century. But his name also appears in the ledger, the final name, the last guest to receive a complimentary seasonal cake before someone, Dupuy, or whoever kept this record, decided to stop counting. The ledger remains in the Hôtel de Paris Museum's archives. It is not displayed publicly. Researchers who request access are told the document is too fragile for handling and are offered photocopies of selected pages, pages that do not include the death notations or the final entry. Dorothy Kaminsky continued her volunteer work at the museum until 2003. She never published her findings. When asked why, she offered only a brief response. Some things shouldn't be verified. Some patterns shouldn't be completed. She paused. And some records should be left alone. The Hôtel de Paris still stands on 6th Street in Georgetown. It operates as a museum now, offering tours of the restored rooms and exhibits about Louis Dupuy's life and legacy. Visitors can see the kitchen where meals were prepared, the dining room where guests were served, the guest rooms where travelers slept on their way to somewhere else. The basement archives are not part of the tour, and the fruitcake recipe, if it ever existed, has never been found. 47 names, 47 deaths, 1 year apart to the day. And then silence. A counting that stopped because someone, something, knew it was being watched. The ledger waits in the darkness below the hotel. Its pages are blank now, have been blank for over a century. But the final entry remains, written in a trembling hand, a warning or a confession, or perhaps simply a record of the moment when the pattern became too clear. To ignore. Must stop. They know we are counting. Who they are, the ledger does not say. What they knew, it does not explain. And Walter Henriksen, who asked about the history of the cake, who walked out into a Christmas morning in 1904 and never returned, he remains missing. The count stopped at 47, but the recipe, presumably, did not. Some fields grow things that were never planted. South Park is not a town but a high-altitude basin, a vast grassland, approximately 50 miles long and 30 miles wide, ringed by mountain ranges that rise to 14,000 feet and trap the flat expanse like water in a bowl. The park sits at an average elevation of 9,000 feet, making it one of the largest high-altitude valleys in North America. In winter, temperatures routinely drop to 30 below zero, and the wind sweeps across the open ground with nothing to slow it for miles in any direction. The town of Fairplay serves as the basin's primary community, population approximately 700, founded in 1859 during the gold rush and named by miners who wanted a fair play alternative to the claim jumping prevalent in other camps. The surrounding ranches have operated continuously since the 1870s, raising cattle and hay in a landscape so exposed that survival requires a particular kind of stubbornness. It is on these ranches, scattered across the northern section of the basin, that the snowmen have appeared. The first documented report comes from December 1893, 2 years after the Garrett Homestead fire that killed a family of 7 on Christmas Eve, 1891. A rancher named Tobias Lundqvist, whose property bordered the Garrett land, wrote in his journal that he woke on Christmas morning to find figures of snow standing in his north pasture. He counted 23 of them, arranged in rows, all facing south toward the charred remains of the Garrett house. Lindqvist assumed neighbor children had played a prank, though he noted that the nearest occupied homestead was 4 miles away and the snow showed no footprints leading to or from the figures. He knocked them down that afternoon. The following Christmas, they returned. 26 this year, he wrote on December 25, 1894. Same field, same arrangement, same direction. I do not understand how this is done. I do not think I wish to understand. Lindqvist's journals, preserved in the Park County Archives, document the snowman's appearance every Christmas from 1893 until his death in 1912. The count varied, sometimes as few as 18, sometimes as many as 34, but the pattern remained consistent. Perfect rows, perfect spacing, all facing the Garrett homestead. The phenomenon did not end with Lindqvist's death. His son Eric inherited the ranch and continued to record the appearances until 1947. Eric's daughter, Margaret Halverson, maintained the tradition until 1982, and current ranchers in the area confirm that the snowmen still appear, though most are reluctant to discuss it publicly. "You learn not to talk about it," said one rancher, who requested anonymity in a 2016 interview. "People think you're crazy, or they think you're making it up for attention. But everyone out here knows. Every rancher north of Fairplay has seen them at least once. You just don't mention it to outsiders." The snowmen are not crude constructions. Witnesses describe them as unusually uniform, approximately 4 feet tall, with 3 distinct sections of decreasing size, smooth surfaces, and no features. No eyes, no mouths, no arms, no accessories, just white forms, standing in rows, silent and identical. They appear regardless of weather conditions. In years with heavy December snowfall, this might seem unremarkable, but multiple accounts describe snowmen appearing after weeks of dry cold, when the ground was bare and no precipitation had fallen. In 1973, rancher William Oduya photographed 17 snowmen standing in a field that had not seen measurable snow in over a month. The photographs show the figures clearly, casting shadows in the morning light, surrounded by brown grass and frozen dirt. There was no snow anywhere else, Oduya said in a 1991 interview with a regional newspaper. Just these shapes, standing there, white as could be. I walked out to touch one. It was snow, all right, packed tight, cold, the real thing. But there was no snow to make them from. None. I've thought about it for almost 20 years, and I still can't explain where they came from. The directional orientation is equally consistent. Every documented account notes that the snowmen face south-southwest. The precise bearing toward the former Garrett homestead, now an empty lot marked only by a foundation of blackened stones. The homestead burned on Christmas Eve, 1891. The family, Isaiah Garrett, his wife Constance, and their 5 children ranging in age from 3 to 14, perished in the fire. The cause was officially listed as an overturned lamp, though some contemporaneous accounts suggest the family was not alone when the fire began. A neighbor named Horace Pemberton, who rode toward the smoke and arrived too late to help, gave a statement to the Park County Sheriff that was never included in the official record. A copy survived in Pemberton's personal papers, discovered by his great-granddaughter in 2008. "I saw figures in the field," Pemberton wrote, "between my property and the Garrett house, standing in rows watching the flames. I thought they were people at first, come to help, but as I rode closer, they were not people. They were white. They did not move. By the time I reached the house, they were gone. Only the fire remained." Pemberton's statement was dated December 26, 1891, 2 years before the Snowmen began their documented appearances on the Lindqvist property. In 2004, a soil scientist named Dr. Helena Johansson obtained permission to collect samples from beneath the snowmen on the property then owned by the Halverson family. She conducted her analysis over 3 years, comparing soil from locations where snowmen had stood with control samples from adjacent areas. Her findings were never formally published, but her research notes were obtained by a journalist named Samuel Achebe in 2012. The notes describe elevated concentrations of potassium and phosphorus in every sample taken from beneath a snowman location, levels consistent with decomposed organic matter. "The readings suggest biological material," Dr. Johansson wrote, "plant or animal tissue broken down over an extended period. The concentrations are not dangerous, but they are anomalous. There is no agricultural explanation. The fields have been used for grazing, not burial, and yet the soil chemistry suggests something was deposited at these precise locations." She also noted a pattern in the spacing. The snowmen, when mapped across multiple properties and multiple years, did not appear randomly. They appeared in a grid that extended across property lines as if following a survey that had nothing to do with the ranch's actual boundaries. When Dr. Johansson overlaid her measurements on historical maps, she discovered that the grid aligned with a homestead claim filed in 1876, a claim that was never developed and whose owner, a man named Ezekiel Thorne, disappeared in the winter of 1877. Thorne's claim would have encompassed the Garrett homestead, the Lindqvist ranch, and the properties of 4 other families who have reported snowmen appearances over the past century. No record exists of what Thorne intended to do with the land. No record exists of where he went or what happened to him. "I stopped the research in 2007, Dr. Johansson told Achebe. "I found myself mapping things I didn't want to map, patterns I didn't want to see. I am a scientist. I believe in evidence and explanation. But some evidence points toward explanations that I am not prepared to accept." The Garrett Homestead Foundation remains visible from the Fay County road that bisects South Park. The stones are black with soot even now, more than 130 years after the fire. Nothing grows within the foundation's perimeter. Ranchers who own adjacent land do not graze cattle there. They do not discuss why. Each Christmas morning, the snowmen appear. They stand in their rows, facing south-southwest, watching something that burned long ago and has never stopped burning in whatever memory the land preserves. They melt by afternoon if the temperature rises. They persist for days if it does not. But they always appear again the following year, in the same locations, following the same grid, honoring boundaries that were drawn by a man who vanished and a family who died. No one builds them. No footprints lead to them. No snow falls to explain them. They are simply there, as they have been for over a century, standing vigil in a field that remembers what no one else is willing to speak. And beneath them, in the soil, something has been counting all along. Some children were never counted. Redstone lies in the Crystal River Valley of western Colorado, approximately 40 miles south of Glenwood Springs, in a canyon so narrow that the sun reaches the valley floor for only a few hours each winter day. The town was built in 1899 by John Cleveland Osgood, founder of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, as a model community for the workers of his coal mining operations. Unlike the squalid camps that housed miners elsewhere in the state, Redstone was designed with ambition. 84 cottages for workers and their families, a clubhouse with a library and theater, an inn for visitors, and all of it constructed in the arts and crafts style that Osgood had admired during his travels in Europe. At the head of the valley overlooking the town, Osgood built his private residence, Cleveholme Manor, a 42-room Tudor mansion that locals called the Castle. The manor featured hand-carved woodwork, Tiffany lamps, silk wallpaper, and a great hall suitable for entertaining the industrialists, politicians, and celebrities who traveled by private railcar to visit Osgood in his mountain retreat. The coal operations closed in 1909, just a decade after the town's founding. The miners dispersed. The cottages were sold or abandoned. Redstone became a quiet backwater, preserved by its isolation and its architecture, visited occasionally by tourists and historians interested in the curious experiment of a benevolent coal baron who built a utopia that could not last. But before the collapse, there was the choir. The Christmas Eve performance of 1906 was documented in the company newspaper, the Coal Basin Bulletin, which published a brief account on December 28th of that year. According to the article, Osgood had organized a children's choir to perform carols at the manor for his guests, who that year included a railroad executive from Chicago, a senator from Pennsylvania, and the wife of a copper magnate from Butte. The children, drawn from the families of Redstone's workers, rehearsed for 3 weeks under the direction of the town's schoolteacher, a woman named Harriet Vogel. The performance was by all accounts a success. The children sang 6 carols in the Great Hall, illuminated by candles and firelight, while snow fell in the valley beyond the manor's windows. Osgood presented each child with a gift, an orange, a peppermint stick, and a silver dollar. And the evening concluded with a supper for the adults, while the children were returned to their families in the town below. A photograph was taken to commemorate the occasion. It shows 32 children arranged in 4 rows before the manor's stone facade, dressed in white robes with red sashes, their faces solemn in the manner of 19th century portraiture. The photograph was reproduced in the Coal Basin Bulletin, and copies were distributed to the families. Several original prints survive in the collections of the Redstone Historical Society and the descendants of the original residents. The discrepancy was not noticed until 1963. That year, a genealogist named Evelyn Sandoval was researching the history of Redstone for a master's thesis on company towns in Colorado. As part of her work, she compiled a census of the town's population in 1906 using company records, birth certificates, and school enrollment documents. Her count of children between the ages of 6 and 14, the age range specified by the Bulletin for choir participation, totaled 29. The photograph showed 32. Sandoval assumed she had made an error. She rechecked her sources, expanded her search to include neighboring settlements, considered the possibility that children from other towns had been brought in to supplement the choir. She found no evidence to support any of these explanations. The records were clear. 29 children lived in Redstone in December 1906. The photograph showed 32. She contacted descendants of the original families, many of whom had preserved their own copies of the photograph. She asked them to identify the children, matching faces to names across multiple sources. Over the following 2 years, working with 9 families scattered across Colorado, New Mexico, and California, she successfully identified 29 children in the photograph. 3 remained unidentified. They stood in the back row, at the far left edge of the frame. 2 girls and a boy positioned slightly apart from the other children, their white robes identical to the others, but their faces somehow less distinct. In every copy of the photograph, original prints, newspaper reproductions, later reprints, Their features appeared subtly blurred, as if they had moved during the exposure or stood at a slightly different focal distance. "The blurring is consistent across all copies," wrote Dr. Marcus Oyeleran, a photographic historian who examined 3 original prints in 1987. This suggests the anomaly is present in the source image, not the result of damage or reproduction error. However, the exposure time for this photograph would have been approximately 2 to 3 seconds, not long enough to explain the degree of motion blur evident in these 3 subjects, assuming they moved at all. The other children are sharp. These 3 are not. I have no technical explanation for the discrepancy. Sandoval's attempts to identify the 3 children continued until her death in 1991. She interviewed surviving descendants, examined church records, searched for orphanages or foster arrangements that might have placed unrelated children in Redstone during the relevant period. She found nothing. "They are not in the records," she wrote in her final research notes. "They are not in the memories. No family claims them. No document names them. They appear in the photograph, standing among children who were real and accounted for, and then they vanish from history, as if they were never meant to be seen at all." The Redstone Historical Society has received periodic inquiries about the photograph since Sandoval's research became known. The Society's position is that the discrepancy reflects incomplete records, rather than anything unusual, a reasonable explanation that satisfies most inquirers. But certain details resist this explanation. In 2002, a digital restoration specialist named Ingrid Halverson obtained permission to scan the best-preserved original print at high resolution. Her goal was to enhance the blurred faces, to recover details that might aid identification. She worked on the image for 3 months, applying techniques developed for forensic and archival photography. The faces would not resolve. "Every enhancement I attempted made them worse, not better," Halverson said in a 2005 interview. "The more I sharpened the surrounding details, the more indistinct those 3 faces became. It was as if the blur was not on the surface of the image, but somehow embedded in it. I've restored photographs from the 1870s that were water damaged, fire damaged, chemically degraded. I've never encountered anything like this. Those faces do not want to be seen." Halverson also discovered something that earlier examiners had missed. When she analyzed the spatial relationships between the figures, she found that the 3 unidentified children cast no shadows. Every other figure in the photograph, the 29 identified children, the stone facade behind them, the bare trees at the edge of the frame, cast shadows consistent with the winter sun's position on a late December afternoon. The 3 children in the back row did not. They stood in the same light as the others. They should have cast the same shadows. They did not cast any. "I checked this multiple times," Halverson said. "I consulted with a physicist who specializes in photographic optics. He could not explain it. Shadows are a function of physics. Light is either blocked or it isn't. Those children appear to be standing in the photograph, but according to the shadows, nothing is standing where they stand." Cleveholme Manor still stands at the head of the Crystal River Valley. It has changed hands many times since Osgood's death in 1926, a private residence, a resort, a non-profit retreat center. Tours are offered during certain seasons. Visitors can see the Great Hall where the choir performed, the fireplace before which they sang, the windows through which the snow fell on that Christmas Eve over a century ago. The photograph hangs in the Redstone Historical Society's small museum on the main street of town. It is displayed without comment on the discrepancy, identified only as Children's Choir, Christmas Eve, 1906. Visitors examine it briefly, note the solemn faces and white robes, and move on to other exhibits. Few notice the 3 figures at the back. Fewer still notice that their faces cannot be clearly seen, that their shadows are absent, that no one has ever been able to say who they were or where they came from. 29 children lived in Redstone in 1906. 29 children sang in the Great Hall of Cleveholme Manor. 29 children received oranges and peppermints and silver dollars from the hands of John Cleveland Osgood. 32 children appear in the photograph. The 3 who do not belong have stood in that back row for over 100 years, their faces turned toward a camera that could not quite capture them, their shadows absent from a world that has no record of their existence. They were not counted then. They cannot be counted now. And in the photograph, preserved in archives and family collections, they remain, waiting, perhaps, for someone to finally call them by name. No one ever has. Some rooms exist only when no one is looking. The Cliff House stands at the base of Pikes Peak in Manitou Springs, Colorado, a Victorian resort town established in the 1870s around the mineral springs that bubble up through the red sandstone. The hotel was originally constructed in 1873 to serve the health seekers and tourists who traveled by rail to sample the waters and gaze upon the mountain that the Ute people called the Sun Mountain long before Zebulon Pike gave it his name. The original structure burned in 1900. The current building, completed in 1903, was designed in the Queen Anne style, with turrets, gables, and a wraparound veranda overlooking the town and the mountains beyond. It was considered one of the finest hotels in Colorado at the time of its opening, hosting presidents, industrialists, and celebrities who came to take the cure or simply escape the summer heat of the plains. The hotel has operated continuously since 1903, surviving economic downturns, changes in ownership, and shifting tourist preferences. It was restored to its Victorian grandeur in the 1990s and currently operates as a boutique hotel with 24 guest rooms, each named for a notable figure from the region's history. The rooms are numbered 1 through 24. There is no room 25, and yet complaints about room 25 have been filed by guests on at least 14 occasions since 1958. The first documented complaint was lodged on December 26, 1958, by a traveling salesman named Bernard Kowalski of Kansas City. Kowalski had stayed in room 18 on Christmas Eve and Christmas night. According to his written complaint, preserved in the hotel's archived correspondence, he was awakened at approximately 2 a.m. on Christmas morning by music coming through the wall, a music box or similar mechanism playing a tune I did not recognize. Kowalski knocked on the wall and called the front desk. The night clerk, a woman named Rosalind Weaver, informed him that the adjacent room, room 17, was unoccupied. Kowalski insisted the sound was coming from beyond room 18, from a room on the other side. Weaver explained that there was no room on the other side. Room 18 was at the end of the corridor, its eastern wall abutting an exterior chimney chase. The guest became agitated, Weaver noted in her incident log. He insisted he could hear music from room 25. When I informed him that no such room existed, he demanded to see the floor plan. I showed him. He could not explain. The music, he said, continued until approximately 3:15 a.m., then stopped abruptly. Kowalski checked out the following morning and did not return. His complaint was filed and forgotten. Similar incidents occurred in 1964, 1971, 1978, and 1983, always. During the Christmas period, all was involving guests who reported hearing music from a room that did not appear on any floor plan. The descriptions were consistent: a music box melody, unfamiliar but distinctly structured, playing for approximately 1 to 2 hours in the early morning of Christmas Day. In 1992, a hotel employee named Theodore Amundsen decided to investigate. Amundsen had worked at the Cliff House for 7 years and had heard the stories from colleagues. On Christmas Eve of 1992, he positioned himself in the third-floor corridor near room 18, the location most frequently associated with the complaints. He waited from midnight until 4 a.m., equipped with a tape recorder and a notebook. At 1:47 a.m., he heard it. A music box, he wrote in his personal journal, discovered after his death in 2014. Unmistakable. Coming from the eastern end of the corridor, where there is no room. I walked toward the sound. It grew louder. I placed my hand on the wall where the chimney chase should be. The plaster was warm. The music was coming from inside the wall. Amundsen's tape recorder captured 17 minutes of audio before the batteries failed. When he played the recording the following day, he heard only static punctuated by brief fragments of melody, too distorted for identification, too structured to be random noise. "I know what I heard," he wrote. "I know where it came from. I do not know how to explain either." Amundsen shared his experience with the hotel's management, who thanked him for his diligence and suggested he take a few days off. He continued to work at the Cliff House until his retirement in 2009 and never reported another incident. But his journal entries from subsequent Christmas seasons note a recurring detail. The wall at the end of the third-floor corridor, he claimed, was never the same temperature twice, sometimes cold, as exterior walls should be. In winter, sometimes warm, as if something behind it were generating heat. The most detailed account of the Room 25 phenomenon comes from December 2016. A guest named Dr. Yuki Nakamura, a music theory professor from the University of Denver, stayed at the Cliff House on Christmas Eve as part of an annual tradition with her husband. She was assigned Room 19, adjacent to Room 18. At approximately 2:20 a.m. on Christmas morning, she was awakened by music. Unlike previous witnesses, Dr. Nakamura had the training to document what she heard. She transcribed the melody in standard notation, capturing approximately 45 seconds of music before the sound ceased. The following week, she analyzed her transcription and consulted with colleagues in the university's musicology department. The melody, they determined, matched no composition in any accessible archive. However, certain structural elements, the key, the rhythmic pattern, the intervallic relationships, suggested a Central European origin, likely Austrian or German, from the mid-19th century. One colleague, a specialist in Viennese parlor music, noted a resemblance to a category of lullabies popular in the Biedermeier period, though he could not identify a specific source. Dr. Nakamura expanded her research. Over the following 18 months, she contacted archives in Vienna, Munich, and Prague, searching for compositions that matched her transcription. In March 2018, she received a response from the Austrian National Library. A musicologist named Friedrich Lindqvist had examined her transcription and identified a potential match. A lullaby titled Schlaf, mein Engel, Sleep, My Angel, composed by a Viennese music teacher named Margaret Vogler in 1847. The composition had been published in a limited edition of approximately 200 copies, distributed primarily to Vogler's students and their families. The sheet music no longer existed. Every known copy had been destroyed in a warehouse fire in Vienna in 1873. Dr. Lindqvist had identified the match not through comparison with surviving scores, but through a letter written by one of Vogler's students in 1851, which described the melody in sufficient detail to confirm the correlation. "The probability of a random match is effectively zero," Dr. Lindqvist wrote to Dr. Nakamura. "Your transcription corresponds to a composition that has not existed in written form for 145 years. I cannot explain how you came to hear it." Dr. Nakamura published her findings in a regional musicology journal in 2019. The article generated modest academic interest and occasional inquiries from paranormal researchers, which she declined to engage with. She has not returned to the Cliff House. The hotel's current management acknowledges the Room 25 stories, but offers no official position. Floor plans confirm 24 rooms. Construction records from 1903 confirm 24 rooms. Fire inspections, insurance documents, and architectural surveys all confirm 24 rooms. There is no room 25. But the wall at the end of the third-floor corridor, the wall that should abut a chimney chase and nothing more, has been examined by 3 separate contractors over the past 2 decades. Each has noted an anomaly. The wall is approximately 18 inches thicker than the architectural plans indicate. Each has recommended further investigation. Each recommendation has been declined by management without explanation. What occupies those 18 inches has never been determined. No one has opened the wall. No one has measured the space behind it. No one has explained why a chimney chase would require 18 additional inches of depth, or why the plaster on that wall is sometimes warm to the touch on the coldest nights of the year. The complaints continue, though less frequently than before, perhaps because fewer guests stay at the hotel over Christmas, perhaps because those who hear the music choose not to report it. The front desk staff have learned to respond with polite acknowledgement and gentle redirection. There is no room 25, they explain. There never has been. But somewhere in the walls of the Cliff House, a music box plays a lullaby that was written in Vienna in 1847, a lullaby for a child whose name has been forgotten, a lullaby whose notes were burned to ash over a century ago and yet persist somehow in a room that exists on no floor plan and behind no door. Schlaf, mein Engel. Sleep, my angel. The music plays each Christmas morning for an hour or 2, and then it stops. The wall grows cold again, the corridor falls silent, and room 25, wherever it is, waits for another year to pass before it remembers how to sing.